Mortismedia.
When I was young, under 5, my parents were still together, and my younger brother and I spent a lot of time together at our dad's brother's and father's house. My dad's brother had 4 kids, so we spent a lot of time there with our cousins. There was a bedroom that was converted into our playroom, just a smallish room with lots of toys. We would always have weird feelings in there, but one time in particular, a few of us were standing in the middle of the room, when all of a sudden, the toys started moving on their own. Items pushed far into a shelf, moved forward before falling off to the ground. It all happened in slow motion, like an invisible string was pulling everything to the center of the room. We were creeped out, to say the least, and told the adults, who somewhat dismissed it. Another time, I was playing with a stuffed lion in the playroom. I put it in this little wooden shelf and locked it. I went out to the living room where everyone else was, then went back to the room to find the shelf unlocked and the lion 3 feet away from the door. I was around 4 at this point and remember being angry at whoever was moving it and started asking everyone back in the living room if they had done so. They said no, and to ask our cousin. My older cousin, who was 10 at the time, was in his room with music playing loudly and was annoyed that I had even knocked on his door. It certainly wasn't him. One of the scariest memories I have was in this house as well. I just get chills thinking back to it. I was sharing the bottom bunk with a cousin of mine. The door was open and faced out to the hallway. I'll never forget the dark silhouette of a man turning from the living room down this hallway and started walking down the hall towards us. We were both awake and looked at each other scared. He had red glowing eyes and was very tall, but somehow resembled our grandfather's figure. He looked as if he was staring at us down the hallway and then stopped and turned into the playroom. We told our dads about it the next day, and I remember my dad picking me up to explain how tall he was. My parents divorced and I haven't seen my father in over 15 years. My biological grandfather is dead, and I don't communicate with those cousins anymore. All that I know is that I never want to see that house again. Growing up, my family became acquainted with this husband and wife who bought an old Victorian home my parents originally looked at when we moved to the area. My parents hit it off really well with them, and my family basically helped these 2 friends of ours fix up the place and completely remodeled it together over the span of a few years. Really great people who my family have loved and trusted for decades. They're practically family, and they don't have kids, so it's like they've been my aunt and uncle for most of my life now. My parents are from the deep south and always joked with their friends about the home they purchased being super haunted. The wife, Terry, and the husband, Dan, both grew up in the Catholic Church and held a lot of resentment towards it and were agnostic. They didn't believe in any of the stuff my parents joked about and openly mocked the idea of it, for as long as they could at least. For the first few months that Terry and Dan moved in, they actually had to live on the first floor of the home, because it was the only room that was suitable, with this small room off the kitchen which was on the back of the house. This was actually a servant's quarter, and it was very creepy. It was small, had 1 door into it from the kitchen, and 1 door out to the back of the house to the backyard. The strangest part was that it had this wooden spiral staircase in a closet. One of the closet doors in the room opened to a small spiral staircase that was entirely enclosed in this dark space to the 2nd and 3rd floor. It was weird but not uncommon with a higher-end Victorian home that needed servants' quarters back in the day. Anyway, no one liked that staircase. After the first month or so, the staircase started making noises at night. It was mostly creaking and some squeaking that would wake both Terry and Dan up, but one night they woke up to footsteps and a loud cough coming from the closet staircase. They both thought it was an intruder, so Dan scrambled to the closet up the staircase with a flashlight and hammer, only to find nothing. He checked some of the exits at the top of the staircase into the unfinished upper floors, but there was nothing. When they told my parents, Dan told them there weren't any footprints on all the dusty steps of the stairs, and it was cold in there at night, and chalked it up to the stairs expanding and making some old beams pop and squeak. They went back to bed that night, but every once in a while they'd wake up to the same thing, and Dan would go there to find nothing. We found out though that one time, Terry went up there with him, and she said that the upper floor rooms smelled heavily of tobacco and vanilla, and they had never smelled it that way during the day or before. Again, never any footsteps in the stair or the room they would check. Eventually they ended up tearing out the staircase altogether, as it had some moisture damage. During that time, they were living on the first floor. There were some other issues going on with their dog. They had this little chihuahua who would regularly growl at the foot of the bed at night, growl and bark at the corners of the room day and night, and often act very skittish when it was normally a very happy and fun-loving dog. They chalked it up to moving into this big new home and having all this construction around, and thought nothing of it until one day, Terry was lounging in the front room watching TV, and she heard their dog whimpering. This is kind of hard to describe, but the first floor ceiling was over 10 feet tall, and many of the front rooms, including the foyer and dining room, were separated by these grand wooden sliding doors that joined together too close. She walked to the dining room and found her dog stuck between two of the wooden sliding doors that had been opened just long enough for the dog to fit halfway through. The dog was really happy though, and wagging its tail. But when she got closer to it, she recoiled because she saw the dog's fur and skin moving back over and over like it was being petted. Then she noticed, through the gap in the doors, that the dog's front legs were in the air, and that it was like something was trying to pull it through. She yelled the dog's name, and immediately the dog's front legs dropped, and she scurried out between the doors. This never happened again, but by this point Terry was freaked out, and my parents stopped the ghost jokes entirely. But it gets worse. Way worse. A few years into remodeling this place, they have their first 2 floors nearly done, and are living on the 2nd floor fixing up the basement and 3rd story before they move on to remodeling the outside of the house. During this time, things have calmed down for the most part. They still hear weird stuff at all times of the day, but it's a massive century-old home in the process of being remodeled. Noises happen. Terry and Dan are asleep at night on the 2nd floor. The entire 1st floor is done, most of the 2nd floor is finished, and at this point the house is starting to feel like a home. Terry wakes up in the middle of the night to very loud sounds coming from the 1st floor. It was music, lots of talking and laughing. Basically, it sounded like a huge party was going on. She doesn't remember what the music sounded like, just that it and the people laughing are talking downstairs, and it was loud enough that she could feel the vibrations and resonance of the sounds directly below their bedroom. Then, it all just stops and goes silent before she hears sounds like there were a group of people walking up their grand staircase. This was a grand wooden staircase that has 2 different landings. I think you call it cantilevered. It sounds like 10 or more people are walking up the stairs together. By the time they make it to the 1st landing, it sounds like there are just a few people, and by the time the noise reaches the top of the stairs, it only sounds like 2. Terry, as you can imagine, was scared to death and threw her head under the covers as she heard the footsteps approach the bedroom, and then her stomach dropped when she heard the door creak open. It was quiet at first, but then all of a sudden she heard talking. She said it sounded like a conversation going on the radio that was too low to hear, and then was turned up to room volume. Once the voices were loud enough to understand, she quickly realized the voices were talking about her, and they were just at the foot of the bed. She said she heard the voices of 2 different women, one old, one young. They sounded angry. They were saying awful things about Terry, how she looked, how she acted, what she wore. They went on to say more awful things and how she needed to leave the house. Terry snapped at that moment and pulled the covers off her face and screamed her husband's name. When she pulled off the covers, she saw a short old woman and a tall homely woman looking, who was thin and in her 30s or 40s. And just as she had seen them, suddenly, they weren't there. She said she only saw a flash of them but got a good enough look to see how mad they were. Next thing that happened was her husband rolling over and saying, "Did you hear that?" Dan apparently never heard the party downstairs, but from the moment the door opened he heard the full conversation the 2 women had about his wife. From that point on, Dan obviously knew something was going on, but he was a really stoic guy and just ignored it. If you don't think about it, it doesn't exist. Terry was fully aware she wasn't going insane, and there was indeed something very wrong with the house that she had no explanation for, and she was scared to live there from that point on, and felt watched in every room she was in. So now we get to the worst night, and I honestly don't know if it's even the entire story, as Terry does not often tell it. And what I heard was from my mum when I was old enough to hear it. If I didn't mention it before, her husband Dan worked construction. He was a mason and was doing a job about an hour and a half away from town, and ended up getting snowed in one winter during a bad blizzard we had in like '95. So this left Terry home alone that night during the blizzard, just in the house with their 2 dogs. What I personally remember of this night was waking up at an hour that I wasn't allowed to be up, because the front doorbell was having a fit, which got our dogs barking. My dad happened to be out of town at the time too, so my mum went to the front door with a pistol on our dog and turned on the front porch to see Terry in a coat and her nightgown and rubber boots, in hysterics. Sitting at the top of the stairs, in my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle PJs, I heard Mum opening the door and Terry wailing and crying before peeking down and seeing her collapsed with my mum holding and rocking her. I don't remember how much time passed that night, but I do remember Terry calmed down and some police officers came over, and that's when my mum checked on me and put me back in bed. So years later, when I was old enough, I asked Mum about the story, and this is what my mum told me happened that night. Terry told her that she was in bed with their Chihuahua and their second dog that they had gotten by now, which was a bigger chocolate lab. The house is mostly remodeled at this point, and they turned that second floor bedroom into their master bedroom. It was time for bed, and she was watching the news when there was a loud boom and the house shakes. It sounded like the ceiling fell out of one of the rooms in the house, which was something they were always concerned about. The dogs get spooked and run out the room into the hallway barking, and as she's getting up out of bed to see what's happened, the door to the room just slams shut. She said there was an awful droning noise that hurt her ears, and the whole room filled with pressure, and every corner and edge of the room looked dark, like the room was lit, but for some reason the light wasn't reaching the entire room anymore. The TV started blaring static, her head was pounding, and she said the room just turned red, like someone snapped their fingers. I really have a hard time believing any of this, as I am an agnostic, but here's what she said happened next. She looks up at the light on the ceiling, and when the room turned red, she saw that the ceiling light was what had caused the change of color in the room. It was an old wired chandelier and had many electric candle holders, like bulbs on each spoke. Each candle bulb had changed into a Virgin Mary statuette glowing red. She screamed and the statues began melting and dripping onto the bed. She was able to scramble to the door, and thankfully the door opened without a fuss. She ran downstairs, and when she made it to the second landing, something grabbed her and pushed her against the wall before she fell down the last few steps below the landing. She jumped into the boots and jacket next to the door and ran out into the blizzard scared out of her mind, leaving the front door wide open and the dogs behind. We lived about a 2-minute drive from her home, so it was probably a little over a mile, and that was honestly one of the biggest blizzards I've ever seen in my life in the Midwest. She ran hysterical through all of that to our front door in the middle of the night before collapsing in our foyer. My mum was convinced there was an intruder. Terry had been assaulted, so my mum called the police, who took a while to get there. The officers who responded called the police chief, who lived a few streets down from Terry's home. He walked on over there in the storm and checked out the house and to see about the dogs. He said the front door was wide open and all the lights in the house were on. Every single one, even the table lamps. He checked every room, every closet, walked the grounds around the house and found no prints in the snow besides his and Terry's. The only snow in the house was the one that he had tracked inside and what had accumulated at the entryway while the door was left open. The police brought the dogs over to our house later, and Terry stayed at ours the rest of the night and the next day until the roads were clear enough for Dan to make it back to town and pick up his wife. This really shook Terry up, and at this point they were ready to part with the house and take the loss. In a moment of desperation, she contacted the Catholic church in town for someone to come by and say some sermon or bring some holy water, who knows. She was desperate. They laughed at her and said they don't really do that stuff and that ghosts aren't real, which I can't blame. The Presbyterian preacher in town, though, agreed to walk around the room saying some words from the Bible, and he did. When he was leaving, he asked Terry and Dan if they had asked the ghost to leave yet. He said if you don't tell them you don't want them there, maybe if you tell them that you don't want them there, they'll just leave. So they did. They went in every room and said that they wanted them gone, and that if Terry and Dan didn't get to finish remodeling the house, the city was ready to condemn it and tear it down. And things stopped happening overnight. They ended up finishing the basement and that third story, and the last thing to do was finish up the outside of the house. When they wanted to get ideas for what to paint the front porch and second floor outside balcony, they had my sister take a bunch of pictures from the front and side of the house to visualize paint schemes. My sister had an older Minolta camera, so she had to get the film developed, and when she did, she noticed some startling things. And I actually got to see these pictures with my own eyes as a kid. My sister was freaking out about it before giving it to Terry and Dan. The first floor of the house had this massive parlor with huge windows out to the front and side yard. The developed film showed both windows of the front parlor, and in it, you can see men in period clothes with bowler hats in multiple pictures. In the pictures taken from the front of the house, they are actually staring out at the camera. You could see their expressions and everything, and I remember thinking it was unreal at 9 years old, and there was no way, but there it was. From the shots of the men in the parlor, it appeared that they were smoking or were shrouded in mist. We later learned that the room was a smoking parlor at one point. There was one other part of the house that revealed something in the developed film that was in the second floor outside balcony. The room that exited out onto that balcony from the second floor had a normal door and then a screened wooden storm door on the outside. In every single shot, my sister got off that balcony. There's a little girl in a large poofy dress with a big bow in her hair phased into the door, like she's stuck halfway through it. Nothing spooky happened anymore, but Terry and Dan were done with the remodeling at that point and were ready to get out of the home. Once the house was put on the market though, some of the stuff started up again. They would hear someone running around upstairs in the front room that had access to the outdoor balcony, and sometimes Terry said she'd hear someone that sounded like a little girl humming to herself or bouncing a ball around that wasn't there. Of course, everyone decided it was the little girl from the photos that we took during the remodeling. So that's the story. I've got one more small thing we heard about happening after they sold the house though. I guess Terry ran into the family that bought the home at the grocery store later on. The lady who bought Terry's home actually asked if there was anything weird that happened when Terry and Dan were living there. Terry said maybe, and asked what she meant, and I guess the new homeowners were having trouble with their young daughter. Her grades were slipping in school, as she was a normally straight-A student. So the teachers called a conference with her parents to let her know she was falling asleep in class all the time. When the parents asked the daughter about it, she said she couldn't sleep at night because that was when the little girl wanted to play. Terry told her to go around the house and tell them to leave and they'll stop. Never heard anything again about the house after that. There are some interesting things and details to still tell about the house. There was a room on the second floor that had something wrong with it. The room barely got finished, and I believed they turned it into a small spare bedroom. When you were in the room, you'd feel immediately like you needed to leave. And as a kid, if I went into that room, I'd feel anxious. Women mostly felt nauseous or dizzy. My dad and Dan both worked on the room together, but they finished it as quickly as they could. My dad doesn't scare, but even he said the room was weird feeling. Best way I can describe the room is it didn't feel safe to stay there too long, like something could happen to you at any moment if you didn't leave. So I never felt scared in the house, but anxious in that one room. I ran around the house by myself from like 6 to 9 and never felt afraid anywhere else. And I don't really believe in the paranormal, but as a kid I was superstitious. When we first moved into the area and were house searching, I was 3 years old. This is actually one of my oldest memories. I remember standing in the foyer of that dilapidated mansion and bringing in flowers that I'd picked from outside and setting them on that stair and talking to the ceiling. I don't remember what I said, just that I was doing something nice and whatever I did was appreciated. As a kid, I always attributed that moment to me being accepted by the house. At like age 7 on Halloween, my sister and her high school friends played hide and seek in the house and let me play. This was at night, and they left me in the walk-in closet of one of the unfinished rooms in the dark on an unfinished floor. I was in that closet for probably 15 minutes and never felt scared. No one found me, so I walked out and nothing happened. It's really weird, but as a kid I knew nothing would ever happen to me there or scare me, because of the flower thing. After the night of the two women berating Terry and Dan, hearing the whole thing, my mum and Terry began looking more into the history of the house. My mum actually was the curator of the town's museum, and through land records and old documents, they found out quite a bit about the property's history. Turns out it was built in the early 1800s and was originally a larger building that had an attached dormitory. It was one of the first girls' colleges west of the Mississippi, and definitely the first in the surrounding area. At some point though, the dormitory attached to the main building burnt down. Later, after the fire, the college became a boarding house due to its size. It stayed that way for a while before either yellow fever or tuberculosis really started to go rampant in the Midwest, and the building then became an infirmary and sort of convalescent home for people seeking treatment and rehabilitation from the disease. Right around the turn of the century, the rest of the buildings on the ground were demolished, and the main house was fixed up to be the mansion of a local landowner. It stayed in that family until Terry and Dan bought it. We believe this last family was likely the family of the two women ghosts. The guy who owned the place and sold it to Terry and Dan was one of the last people who lived there. He had lived on the top floor as a teenager when his grandmother had owned the home. When she died in the 70s, the house was just left to nature, and by the time the couple bought it, no one had lived in the house for nearly 30 years. Here's the cool thing. The man who owned the house knew all the family history, who lived in it, when, who it was passed down to. So the patriarch of the family and original owner of the home was his great-grandfather. He was a wealthy landowner and fixed up one of the biggest Victorians in town to be their family home. He passed away though, and his widow lived in that house with her daughter for the rest of their lives, something like 30 or 40 years. When the mother passed, the daughter did soon after. I guess they were very close, and the daughter didn't want to stick around without her mother. Well, you can guess what happens next. When Terry and Dan approached the man who sold the house and asked him about the short old woman and described the homely lithe features of the young woman, the guy immediately knew who they were talking about. He told him that's just his great-gran and great-aunt. He got a kick out of it. They asked him why he never told them the place was haunted. He went on to tell them he didn't believe any of the ghost nonsense and had never experienced anything when he lived there, but that his grandma and great-grandma had always talked about the men in the parlor, and that's how we found out about the front room was a smoking parlor, which we immediately connected to the photos of the men in bowler hats. We never found out who the little girl was. Terry and my mum think she was a victim of yellow fever or tuberculosis when it was being used as a convalescence ward. Also never found out who the hell was haunting the servants' staircase. They seemed to be at peace though whenever my dad and Dan ripped the staircase out. Nothing weird ever happened on that side of the house after that. I used to live in a 3-story house with my parents, younger sibling, and our dog. We moved into this house a few months before my younger sibling was born, and that was when we first met our neighbor across the street. Lucas was the eldest child in the family, and he was always a bit strange, but there were some aspects of his personality that were more than just strange. They were straight up disturbing. It would take hours to cover everything, so let me just get straight to the point. I'm almost certain that Lucas had been inside of our house in the middle of the night. Our house was built on a hill, so it looked like it was only 2 stories from the front, and the basement was connected to the backyard. The yards in this neighborhood were much larger than they are in newer housing developments, so it would have been very easy for someone to enter our backyard unnoticed. Despite this, my family were terrible about making sure all the basement doors were locked. My younger siblings and I would always go in and out when we were playing in the backyard, or someone would go down to let the dog out, and we would end up forgetting to lock one of the doors before bed. We also lived in a safe area where it was common for people to leave their doors unlocked. However, my family did always lock the door leading down to the basement every night, along with all of the other doors on the main level of the house. I had a messed up sleep schedule back then, so I would usually be awake until 3 to 4 in the morning. There are 2 specific instances that happened very late at night, which made me think Lucas had been inside of our house without our knowledge. One night I was in my bedroom on the upper level of the house at around 2:30 in the morning, when I suddenly heard the sound of an angry growl coming from downstairs. Thinking that my dog had spotted a cat in the front yard, I quickly rushed downstairs to stop him from barking and waking up my entire family. This kind of thing would happen every now and then, so I wasn't thinking too much of it at the time. But instead of going downstairs to find my dog at the front window, I found him by the locked door that leads down to the basement. The fur on the back of his neck was standing up, and his nose was pressed to the bottom of the door. I instantly froze up when I realized what was happening. There was something or someone on the other side of the basement door. I was barely a teenager at the time, so I began to panic and started making my way upstairs as quietly as possible. I woke up both of my parents, but neither of them took me very seriously. My dad just assumed that my dog was hearing random noises coming from outside, but he did eventually go back down to check things out. He said everything had seemed normal to him, but also mentioned that we forgot to lock one of the basement doors that night. There was another time that I was up late in my room, but this time, instead of hearing my dog growling, I heard a loud bark that echoed through the entire house. The sound was sudden and intense, similar to a gunshot, and it almost made me jump out of my chair. Assuming again that my dog had seen a cat outside, I quickly looked out the bedroom window and tried to spot whatever he was barking at. But my heart suddenly dropped when, instead of seeing a cat, I saw Lucas running out of our front yard into the pitch black. I watched him run across the street and back towards his own house. Before I rushed to close the curtains and duck out of sight, I remember sitting there struggling to process what I had just seen and questioning why Lucas would be in our yard in the middle of the night. I told my mum about it the very next morning, and she said that she would take it up with Lucas's mum. Because of these two instances, and because of the other details that I can't include, I'm 99.9% sure that Lucas had been inside of our house in the middle of the night. If you know the entire story behind this family, you would also find this thought to be extremely disturbing. I do want to mention this all happened years ago, and my family no longer lives in that house, and those neighbors across the street are doing fine. But looking back on everything now, I'm only just starting to realize how sinister everything truly was. When I was around 14 years old, a peculiar incident took place. My mum had taken up a Secret Santa shopper at a store located in a mall, leaving me in charge of my 3 younger brothers. Their ages were 5, 4, and the youngest was an infant. Typically, secret shopping assignments don't take much time, but rather than simply sitting on a bench outside the store, I wanted to engage the boys in something more entertaining. I must admit, I had never believed in Santa for some reason, but my 2 older brothers did, so I thought it would be amusing to observe their interaction. I asked my mum if I could take the boys to see Santa, and she agreed. We made our way to Santa's workshop, where the boys excitedly approached him and engaged in the usual conversations about toys and their behavior. However, when Santa attempted to hold the infant, he began to cry unconsolably. In retrospect, I should have trusted the baby's instincts and left immediately. Strangely, Santa started commenting on how I was too old for regular gifts from him, but he had an offer for me to become Santa's special helper and receive a very special gift, among other creepy remarks that I no longer recall in detail. Disturbed by his behavior, I declined his offer to hold the baby and sit on his lap, expressing that we had to leave soon anyway. Santa persisted and even placed his hand on one of his thighs, gesturing for me to sit there. Sensing the urgency, I fabricated a story to my brothers claiming that I saw our mom approaching and it was time to go. However, the mall was eerily empty, except for a few elderly individuals using it as a walking path. My younger brothers saw through my deception and insisted on staying, as they hadn't spotted our mum. As I prepared to put the baby back in the stroller and convinced my brothers to leave, Santa glanced around and abruptly grabbed my arm, forcing me to look at him. In a chilling tone, he declared, "It is very naughty of you to lie. I think you need to be punished." Luckily, at that very moment, my mum truly appeared and called out for us. This sudden intervention compelled my brothers to finally leave with me. I confided in my mum about the unsettling encounter, and she swiftly rushed us to the car. She then informed me that she intended to return to the mall and report the incident to mall security. Regrettably, I am unaware of what transpired after, or if any actions were taken. Nevertheless, that encounter left me with an enduring discomfort towards Santa and other mascot characters. Consequently, if I ever have children, I will refrain from taking them to see Santa. The unsettling encounter with that creepy pedo mall Santa has left a lasting impression on me, and I sincerely hope that our paths never cross again. During my senior year of high school, I found myself living with my aunt to wrap up the final 3 weeks before graduating early. The household consisted of my aunt, her husband, and my 11-year-old cousin, Harriet, and myself. The setting was a rural area, and the house, a relic from the era of slavery, stood tall with its 2 stories. It had a main staircase leading to my aunt and uncle's room, and one shared by me and my cousin. A balcony nestled between the 2 connected them. Additionally, a second staircase led to what was called the servants' quarters, a part under construction separated from the rest of the house and accessible only through that particular staircase. One day while under quarantine due to my father contracting COVID-19, I found myself home alone. My cousin, aunt, and uncle were hours away picking up my other cousin from the airport with her husband. My cousin Harriet had often pestered me with tales of 2 sisters who owned the house during its plantation days, insisting the house was haunted. Though I usually dismissed these stories, that made me question their validity. It was in the early afternoon around 3 p.m, still light outside, as I immersed myself in drawing and music on my laptop. I had my headphones on, playing music loudly enough, though it sounded like a speaker if I were to take them off. This was my usual routine when alone. However, on this particular day, a loud thud interrupted the music, even through my headphones. Taking them off, I looked up, suspecting a squirrel or some critter. When the noise persisted, I put my headphones back on, only for the thud to return a few minutes later. Growing annoyed, I decided to investigate. The thud seemed to have come from outside the room, as if on the balcony. Yet I knew the entrance to the balcony was sealed and had been unused for years. Leaving the room, I checked the balcony through the window on the door but found nothing. Frustrated, I returned to the bedroom, determined to finish my work. Yet as soon as I sat down, the thud echoed from the other side of my cousin's closet, where the sealed servants' quarters were. Thinking my family had returned, I decided to take a break, and as I descended the stairs to investigate, there was no car in sight. I was still alone. Suppressing my instincts to flee, I ventured upstairs to the sealed area. In the pitch-dark space, illuminated only by my phone's flashlight, I saw a woman walking in a perfect circle, thin and tall with dark, stringy hair and a tattered dress. She stopped abruptly when the light hit her. The sound of her neck cracking filled the eerie silence as she turned to look at me. I raced down the stairs, locking the door behind me. There was desperate pounds against the door as I sprinted to the bathroom, locking myself in and curling up in the bathtub. Terrified, I called my aunt, who never answered. I stayed in the tub until my family returned, emerging only when I heard them calling for me. I recounted the terrifying encounter to my aunt, to which she casually responded, "So you met Maggie? Don't mind her, it's best to ignore her. She won't hurt you, she just likes to try and scare people." To this day, I've never encountered Maggie again, and I refuse to spend the night at their house. They've since connected the servants' quarters to the top floor and removed the wall between Harriet's closet and the eerie space, creating a connection, which I personally am hesitant to explore. My boyfriend of 5 years has crushed on me for probably 12 or 13 years. You see, he was 2 grades below me and a bit of a bad boy. While I was popular and in honors/college level classes, I wasn't aware he even existed until I met him at my dad's business 7 years ago. He apparently talked about me being his dream girl and was teased that it would never happen. This is important context to the story. In 2009, he and his best friend Josh were getting into pills, due to Josh's grandfather being an amputee and unable to properly attend or understand the need of hiding the medication, thus leaving large amounts of methadone, clompin, and hydrocone and such lying around. This was before the opiate crisis that affected my generation deeply in the last 15 years. 2 days before Christmas 2009, Josh overdosed in the bedroom that my boyfriend is currently staying in. The room has never felt spooky, never anything strange about it, but I've had a few pranks pulled on me that we believe Josh does to basically congratulate my boyfriend on being with the woman he oh so patiently waited for. I've woken up to sticky notes completely covering my body, my drinks poured on the floor, and random objects moved right where I exit the bed so that I step on them first thing in the morning. I swear I've heard giggling. Each time I've angrily asked my boyfriend if he was messing with me, and I'm aware when he's lying. He always says no. We like to think it's Josh playing practical jokes, something he was known for. But this is nothing compared to what Josh did for me in 2017, which wasn't a prank, but saved my life. 4 years ago, I went into anaphylactic shock and lost the ability to speak or move my lower body. I was upstairs with a curved and steep staircase separating me from my phone. I remember crawling to the stairs, knowing it would be fatal if I smashed into the wall that the stairs led to before the turn, with very large, steep steps. I know that I was extremely oxygen deprived, but I immediately saw Josh and 2 of my deceased best friends ascending the stairs and carry me to the living room couch with my nebulizer and cell phone. I called 911 but had no voice. My friends were gone except Josh. He told me he was going to wake my boyfriend from the hammock in the back of the yard, and suddenly my boyfriend dreamed of his friend saying that I was in trouble. My boyfriend came running into the house, and by this point I was actually dying. I could no longer use any part of my body and no air came into my lungs. When I inhaled, I remembered thinking of my daughter and praying her father would navigate my loss to her and keep memories of me alive. He actually died in a freak accident 8 months ago, so now I'm fulfilling that for him, but I digress. I struggled to remain conscious, but I was fading. My boyfriend saw the 911 operator on the phone and my sweaty blue body. He told me he didn't think I was breathing, and by some absolute miracle there was an ambulance passing my neighborhood. The hospital and dispatch were half-hour away. This coincidence, plus my boyfriend's sudden premonition that I was hurt, saved my life. Josh and those EMTs saved my life. I remember the EMTs asking my boyfriend if I had overdosed, but I hadn't, and I thought of how Josh had died. I was babbling about how dead people were saving me after a large amount of epinephrine, so no wonder they thought I was high. The doctors and EMTs were baffled at how I managed to get down those stairs, or even stay alive long enough to get help. I had one bruise on my leg that was tiny, and that was it, and the worst headache I've ever had. Turns out I'm allergic to the latex in spray paint. I told them I just slid down the stairs, but that's not how I remembered it. The weird thing is I'd never met Josh when he was alive. I don't know how I recognized him or hallucinated him, but he looked exactly like the picture I was shown. I've had a few paranormal encounters, but my run-ins with Josh saved my life, and he never even knew me. So thanks, Josh, for giving me more time on this earth, and I wish we had met many years before. I do hope he's resting peacefully, just periodically popping in to check on us. When I was a preteen growing up in rural Texas, a family from Las Vegas moved next to us. It was Harry and his wife, her mother, 2 daughters, and one of their husbands. I was drawn to them because they were really very friendly and interesting, all except Harry. It didn't take long to figure out that everyone in the family hated him. He gave off a real dirtbag vibe, and the family had money, but it came from his wife's side of the family. He didn't really fit in with the rest of them. Over a year or so, I spent more and more time over there but avoided Harry like the plague. Talking to his stepdaughter, I learned that their mother was getting ready to divorce him. I think he could see the writing on the wall too. One day out of the blue, he stopped over at my house. I was outside riding on my bike or something, and he asked me if I wanted to take a ride with him to check on their cattle. For some stupid reason, I forgot all of my misgivings about him. I thought it might be cool to take a ride with him out in the country to check on the livestock. My mother was inside talking to a friend on the phone, and I'll never forget how she reacted when I asked her if I could go with him. Without interrupting her conversation, she mouthed, "No," and shook her head to reiterate the point. She told me to go to the front door and shake my head, rather than go outside and telling him I wasn't going. Harry just shrugged and left. After his wife finally kicked him out, Harry started harassing them in weird ways, creeping around their house at night, and even calling in fake obituaries for one of the daughters into the local newspaper. Thankfully, he took off back to Las Vegas soon after. After I had my own kids, I started thinking about that incident and what could have happened to me that day if my mother hadn't had the foresight to tell me I couldn't go. I think Harry would have hurt me, just to get back at his family members who had fondness for me. It's honestly quite chilling to think about. 10 years ago, I, then 16, had eaten a lot of Burger King on the 4-hour journey to my grandparents' house. When we arrived to see my nan, it was Christmas Eve, and, as I still do now when I get excited or happy, I jumped around the house, which combined with the Burger King lunch, made me feel really queasy. This was a sadder Christmas than usual, as my grandpa had passed away earlier that year from Alzheimer's, but my family were determined to lift my nan's mood by making it a fun Christmas. Now on to the spooky bit. I decided to sleep off the self-inflicted nausea while my family took my nan to the local fish and chip shop, leaving me on my own in the bungalow my nan and grandpa built themselves. I was woken up by the sound of loud music. It was Nat King Cole's song, which is my nan's favorite artist. Being sleepy and not thinking straight, I asked my grandpa to switch it off. Immediately the music stopped. This made me wake up properly, as of course my grandpa had passed away. Tentatively, with my heart racing, I left the bedroom and shouted to see if the rest of the family had got home, but they hadn't. I was still alone. I went into the living room and saw that my grandpa's stereo system had a Nat King Cole CD inside it, so I unplugged it and went back to bed. It wasn't long after falling into uneasy sleep that the Nat King Cole music blared out even louder. It was so loud, it was reverberating around the bungalow, and I started to cry and freaked out. "Grandpa, please turn it off, I don't feel well." The music stopped. I didn't want to get up again, so I stayed awake until my family came back about an hour and a half later. After telling my mum, she checked the stereo, and sure enough it was unplugged. Since then, my nan's dementia has gotten worse, and she often forgets about my grandpa, remembering only about a handsome, kind man and stroking his photo for comfort. The stereo still comes on loudly, usually when she's being difficult to care for or unpleasant, a horrible side effect of dementia, and it calms her immediately. We all think it's our grandpa, in his own sweet way, saying as he used to, "Don't worry, pet. It's all gonna be alright." The ancient history of my grandfather's house, standing for over 200 years, is marked by a tapestry of mysterious events. Originally offering refuge to soldiers during World War II, the shadows of their presence still linger, with one soldier disappearing without a trace, The house later served as an old restaurant, adding layers of history and intrigue. About 4 decades ago, my grandfather stumbled upon an old cross discarded in the trash. Little did he know that its restoration would unleash a series of inexplicable occurrences. After weeks of restoration, the atmosphere within the house shifted dramatically. Mary and Jesus pictures swayed without any apparent cause, and the entire house trembled as if stirred by an unseen force, despite the absence of wind or earthquakes in Bavaria where the house stood. Mysterious sounds also emanated from the basement, further adding to the enigma. In an attempt to distance the unsettling events, my grandfather affixed the restored cross to a nearby tree. Since then, an eerie fog perpetually surrounds the area near the tree. The supernatural occurrences, however, escalated when my grandmother succumbed to cancer. A particular incident following her passing was a call from her disconnected phone to the living room, where only labored breathing echoes could be heard before the connection was abruptly severed. The contract for the phone was inexplicably terminated. December 2015 marked the passing of my grandfather, leaving the house with its unsettling history. Fast forward to 2023, and I find myself entangled in a series of paranormal encounters, adding new chapters to the story. One night, a friend and I ventured to the house at 11 p.m. As we entered the kitchen, a series of unexplainable events unfolded. A knock on the door, a loud bang, and phantom footsteps that we heard upstairs left us in a state of panic. Despite investigating, we found no trace of the mysterious occurrences, prompting us to leave as quickly as possible. There's a second story, where a colleague and I gathered in the living room, when all of a sudden, loud bangs and footsteps echoed from above. While my friend waited anxiously outside, I ventured upstairs alone, petrified, but found no source for the unsettling sounds. My third story. Curiosity led a friend and me to set up cameras in the hallway, capturing the strange happenings. We used 2 phones recording simultaneously from different perspectives, and somehow they mysteriously fell to the floor, pointing towards the ceiling, both at the same time and cutting off the video feed at the same time as it happened. The next story was during a nocturnal visit. A friend and I explored the second floor. Reviewing the footage later revealed a hand and face in an open door, though our subsequent search of the rooms yielded no presence, and the recordings have since vanished. Childhood memories resurfaced when my cousin and I stayed overnight. That's when we heard loud scratching on the front door. What initially seemed like a prank intensified when the scratching persisted during our conversation. My mother's 2-month stay in the house after her separation was marred by discomfort, unwelcome feelings, and unnerving experiences. Sleep paralysis, footsteps, and unexplained noises prompted her swift departure. The spectral activities persist, manifesting in lights flickering, doors opening anonymously, and objects shifting, and unsettling feelings to anyone who dares brave its depths. Each visit unveils a new mystery, prompting me to document it all with my camera, seeking answers. But I'm curious to ask if anyone has experienced anything remotely similar to me. We lived in a house where things have always just been kind of weird. Every single one of my friends and family who was the slightest bit intuitive, i.e. more the women who are more accustomed to being on guard than my uncles or dad, and are very out of touch with emotions, independently expressed that our house, particularly the part of the basement that was fully underground, felt wrong. There's a decent amount I could share, but anyway, here's the story. First, you need to know the layout. That's important. The house had the main floor over a basement that partially opened up to the outside, on the back side of the house, and one other side. I had a bedroom in the basement, with a window facing the woods. We owned the 19 acres the house sat on, and on the ground floor there was a deck, which stretched over where the basement opened to the backyard/woods. So from the basement, you exited the backyard under the deck. This deck was accessible outside from the ground, and you could access it from the inside of the house via the living room and primary bedroom. A lot of weird things happened. Like the knocking, there were always knocking sounds on the basement glass doors and windows. My friends heard it too. We always felt like we were being watched. It was deeply unsettling, and the further you went into the basement, the more evil it felt. I know it sounds cliché to say evil, and maybe it was just the primal discomfort of being underground, but something really felt bad back there. The knocking felt intelligent. There were no trees or bushes near the house to cause it, and the knocking moved from window to window or glass door to glass door. While it did sometimes knock on one of the windows upstairs, because most of those windows were on the deck, it mostly stayed downstairs. It was always 3 to 5 knocks at a time. It felt like it was taunting me. It happened more when my parents were not home. They never heard the knocking, but my friends all did when we would be home alone. But fine, maybe this was a person with bad intentions for a teenage girl, a human stalker. I don't really believe in the paranormal actually. However, this experience is what I keep circling back to, and it really makes me doubt all the other weird things I've experienced too. I was downstairs in my room one night. The knocking was much worse this time, but there wasn't any reason why, e.g. the weather was normal and calm. The dog, feeling the weird vibes, was lying protectively on my legs and facing the doorway. He felt uncomfortable enough that he would go on patrol of the house occasionally, and he would bark and growl at the knocking. Suddenly I hear big, heavy footsteps on the deck upstairs. It was so distinctive. I could even tell you that it was a man, and that it sounded like heavy cowboy boots. Heavy, like the steel toe kind, but of course, you can't know for certain they're steel toe. Cowboy boots are also not uncommon in this rural community in southwestern Missouri, Jasper and Newton counties. My dog launched off me and raced upstairs, and I could hear him in front of the windows and glass deck making sounds I've never heard him make. I thought it was just an intruder, so I was very glad that my big dog might scare him off. The thing is though, I never heard the footsteps leave the deck. I call my mum after my dog calms down enough to come back to me, still on edge. I ask if I should call the police. What's the point? If they take over an hour to arrive, I thought. We call a neighbor to drive over and have a look around. It says he didn't see anything and left. I opt to stay upstairs in my parents' bedroom. Again, the bedroom had access to the deck via a glass door. The glass has a privacy film over it to blur the details. I'm sitting on the bed, facing the door on my phone, and my dog is, again, lying protectively on my legs when he's not getting up to patrol the house. He's very on edge, and I'm starting to calm down when I hear him growl. It's not the typical growl I hear when, for example, a strange man comes over. A man I know but the dog doesn't like. It was more primal. I look up, and what I see terrifies me. There's a face in the window. Except, it doesn't have a face. It's pressed up against the glass and I can make out a white person-colored face, but I see no contours of any facial features. That's the thing that scared me most. Yes, there was a privacy blurring film on the window, but I should have been able to make out light and shadow where there should be eyes, a nose, or a mouth, but there was none. It was short too. It didn't turn away. It very slowly backs away, and I can't explain why, but I get the feeling that it wanted me to see it, and only left once it knew I had. There was another experience I suffered in the house. This was when there was a young child living with me. At first, she had a room in the basement. The room was kind of midway through the basement. The half of the basement that opened up to the outside felt tolerable, but the further back you went, the worse the basement felt. I always chalked it up to the primal fear of being underground. So this child's bedroom connected to the storm shelter and another bedroom that was deep underground. This child really fought sleep. I mean, kids fight sleep, but it got so bad we moved her to a bedroom upstairs because she would always complain about the shadows. I tried explaining to her the concept of what shadows are. We left night lights, but she was still so scared of the shadows. I've never known what she meant, and her early life was traumatic, so now she doesn't remember anything before like age 10, so she's never been able to articulate her experience. It's hard for me to know whether it was normal 5-year-old stuff, like being scared of the dark, or if something was tormenting her. She lived with us because her life circumstances were not right, so it was also harder to tell what was what trauma, and what was 5-year-old stuff and what was abnormal. She did get better when we moved her upstairs though. Another time I was sleeping on the couch in the basement. There's a hallway behind where the couch is that goes into the deeper part of the basement. The hallway is a straight line with bedrooms on either side in the deep part of the basement before opening out to a wider space where the couch and living area were. I was laying on the couch facing away from the hall when I heard something fall in the back bedroom. I just feel something walk in the living area. It kind of pauses there behind me and I feel paralyzed. I didn't see anything, but the vibes I got were, again, a tall, skinny white man with dark hair. I felt afraid, but not like it was going to hurt me. I started singing hymns, and I felt it leave. There was something else, but it isn't my story to tell, and involved a very vulnerable person. There's also a time that my friend and I went skinny dipping in my pool one night. We heard some strange things, and we all agreed it did not feel like an animal. It was too big, and didn't move like an animal. We all watched the whole night, generally really uncomfortable. I do think we might have seen a camera in the woods though, so it is possible that there were just people living out there. I heard people partying sometimes, but could never discern where exactly the sound was coming from. This is the thing. Some of these things could be explained by people, physical phenomena, or just a really strong electromagnetic field giving me the strange vibes. But the only thing that makes sense, that I can rationalize for the faceless thing, is that I also had a neighbor who turned out to have a thing for teenaged girls. So maybe I just had a stalker. There was also a room in the back of the basement I never went in if I could help it. Nothing happened in there. I just never felt comfortable and hated it. When I first moved in, some friends and I were downstairs when we all heard a very strange sound, like scratching on the wall. We'd felt strange the whole time, but ignored it until this point. I even checked things out, like ley lines or whatever, and the house isn't on one. The previous family who built the house were very Christian, so no occult activity. Sometimes I still doubt what I saw with the faceless face, because it was just so bizarre. My girlfriend and I rented an apartment for a month. The area was secluded, and after dark everyone would mind their own business. Neighbors would hardly talk to each other or even be outside in the evenings. Our apartment was in a building with 4 floors, and each floor had a single apartment. All the apartments were very compact and built to be rented to students. The night we moved in, our taps ran out of water, so I went upstairs hoping to borrow some from the people living there. I realized that 2 out of the 4 apartments were vacant and locked. The apartment on the 4th floor was lit from the inside, so I decided to ring the bell, but to my disappointment no one answered. Over the next week, we used to hear the sound of someone whacking a rod or some sort of metal on maybe the floor or some other object. This would start late at night after 1:30 a.m. and continue for hours. Initially, we didn't care about it, but after some time, it got us intrigued. The sound was clearly from one of the apartments above us, but as I mentioned, 2 of the 3 were vacant for sure, and the third one seemed vacant but was lit from the inside. I knocked on the door many times, but no one ever answered. The whacking sound was a daily occurrence, and on some very late nights, we could hear someone climbing the building stairs. It seemed as if we were the only ones living in the building, especially during the day and until the very late nights. We made up theories to convince ourselves that it was nothing, but the pattern of the whacking was too irregular for it to be made by wind or something other than a person. It would start almost daily around the same time. We asked people around, but they didn't give a satisfactory answer. Simply, no one knew if anyone lived there. Towards the end of our stay, I saw a shady-looking man going upstairs during the day. I asked him if he was the owner of the apartment upstairs, and he said he was, also including the one of the 4th floor. I asked him if anyone lived upstairs, and also about the whacking sound. He told me no one did, and that he's looking for tenants, but he had no idea about the sound. To my surprise, he then asked me, "How long are you going to stay here for?" "4 more days. We leave on the 30th. He asked me if anyone else had rented the place for the next month, and I told him I didn't know. The strangest part is for the next 4 days, there was neither the whacking sound nor the sound of someone climbing up the stairs late at night. However, my girlfriend's internship got extended by 2 days, and we decided to stay there, and just as I had anticipated, the whacking sound resumed after the 30th, which was the day we were supposed to leave. I don't know what it was. I won't ever know. But I'm just happy we got out of that place without any consequences. It really scared me. And sometimes it feels weird just thinking about it, even now. This happened around 4 or 5 years ago when I was 15. It was early Christmas morning, and my sister and her boyfriend had just come over. They were in the kitchen socializing, drinking coffee or tea, maybe snacking on some stocking stuffers. Typical behavior for us to do before opening presents. Now, before I say exactly what happened to me, I think I should sort of describe the general layout of the house so you can get an idea. When you first come in the front door, there's a short hallway going straight before you're met to the kitchen. If you continue through the kitchen in a straight line, you'll walk into the dining room. Then, you'll take a left, and there's some stairs and the living room. The dining room was mostly empty, as it had the dining table actually inside the kitchen, so we set up the tree and presents in the dining room instead of the living room. I was patiently waiting to start opening gifts. I pulled up a chair to the tree and sat there for a while with my back turned to the kitchen while my family was behind me still talking. I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I heard what can only be described as an evil voice whisper in my ear. The reason I describe it as such is because I don't know what else to call it. If you've ever played video games, watched movies, or shows where there's a demonic character, then imagine what its voice sounds like. It was very deep, and a hint of distortion or slight lisp. What it said I don't know, it just sounded like gibberish to me. It lasted about 3 solid seconds and gave me goosebumps at first because I was startled. It was directly in my ear, as if I had been listening to ASMR. I started giggling and swatting my ear and turned around to look at my family, and they all stopped to look at me wondering what I was laughing at. I saw all of their expressions turn from smiling to questionable, and then to a straight face in the matter of seconds. They said that my whole face had turned pale white when I realized that no one was behind me. I kind of stuttered and asked who was behind me playing noises, and they said no one. I thought of the possibility that it was just a joke, but I'm pretty certain it wasn't. The kitchen was around 15 feet behind me, and between the time that the noise stopped and I turned around, there's no way someone could have run from me to the kitchen, got into the position they were in, then acted oblivious. Also, the floor squeaks and the room's hutch would shake if you were to run that fast across it. That sort of prank is extremely random and wouldn't have made sense, at least not for anyone in my family to do. So, I pose the question to you. What on earth do you think it could have been? My partner and I moved into a rental property in Yokine, Western Australia, about 30 years ago. We were in our mid-20s and rented directly from the landlord, who was a cop. Upon entering the house, to the left were 2 bedrooms and the front of the house, and, at the end of the hallway, a long, rumpus room with its own bathroom and toilet. The kitchen and lounge room were to the right of the front door, and behind the kitchen and dining room was an enclosed patio with a bar. The landlord had left part of his uniform in the hallway cupboard, which we thought were odd, a formal jacket, his cap, and some other police things I can't remember. We decided to take the rumpus room and make it our bedroom, as it was spacious and had an ensuite. There were framed football memorabilia stuck directly to the walls. We levered off the plaques, plastered the damage, and repainted the walls. I used one of the front rooms as my wardrobe. The other front room was never used, not even for storage. It was an uncomfortable room that we never entered and always kept the door closed that just had a bad feeling. When I was cooking, I would turn away from the stove, only to return to find the gas turned up. I would complain to my boyfriend to stop messing with my cooking, but it wasn't him. When we were in the lounge room, we would hear noises from the kitchen cupboards and put down baits, thinking we had rats. But the noises never stopped, and the traps were never triggered. We had a friend over one night, and at some stage he started furiously waving his hands over his head. We asked him what was wrong, and he said there was some sort of electrical thing over his head. My boyfriend and I just stared at each other. We had never mentioned it, but we had both experienced it too. It was somewhere between radio static and an electrical hum. From time to time, the sound would appear like a cloud of noise over your head. One day I noticed that this weird, green kind of slimy mold was all over my shoes. None of my other clothes were affected. I looked at my bike, which I also kept in that room, and it was also covered with his weird mold. I've never seen mold grow on metal before or since. My armchair in the back enclosed patio was covered in this mold. No other piece of furniture in the entire house had the mold. Our cat was missing for a day. I searched high and low and eventually found him dead behind the bar in the patio area. This was interesting, as he refused to ever go there. So why would he crawl there to die? One night my boyfriend fell down on his face in the lounge room. I was terrified, as he was obviously in a great deal of distress. I called an ambulance and was taken to hospital. He had suffered a heart attack in his mid-20s. We had enough and decided to move out. As we were loading our van, the man across the road came over for a chat, as we'd become friendly with him. He said that no one ever seemed to live in that house for long. He said that the cop who bought that place was only there for 2 weeks before he took off. He then told us that years ago his best mate lived in that house. He was a bit of a bugger who hated women, authority, and cats. But he loved his football. He worshipped it and died on a grand final day when he fell down and died in the lounge from a heart attack. So is this a ghost story or an unusual set of occurrences? Only you can decide. What I can tell you is that I slept so well once I moved away, I didn't even realize how poor my sleep had been until I was gone. I think we pissed off the entity when we got rid of his memorabilia. I think he hated me. I think he killed my cat. And I think he affected my boyfriend. When I was younger, about 5 years old or so, my family lived in an older 3-story house in a small town in Michigan. My memories have blurred a bit as we moved away halfway through my kindergarten year, but I do remember there was something odd about that house, and I still occasionally have creepy dreams surrounding that house, though they have been growing infrequent as of late. My family was, at least at the time, the nuclear family: Mom, Dad, myself, and my older sister by 5 years. My parents both worked at a local juice factory on different shifts. This night, my mother was out at work, and my father was watching my sister and me. We were making some popcorn in the kitchen to go with the movie we were watching. It had all the makings of a fun evening with my dad. It did not quite happen that way, however. The kitchen was big, and it had a windowed door that opened into our laundry room, which in turn had a door to the backyard. My sister had walked over to the laundry room door, and my dad was over the stove to the right of the door. I was entering the kitchen from the dining room, which was between the living room and the kitchen. Suddenly terrified, my sister screamed as she passed by the door and promptly ran over to my dad. At this point, I had made it to the kitchen, and as any 5-year-old would be, I was curious what scared my big sister so much. In the process, Dad had taken her back to the door, as she was saying she saw something in the window that scared her, though it wouldn't be until years later that I learnt exactly what that was. My dad was attempting to calm her down, assuring her there was nothing there, and what she saw must have just been a trick of the mind. That was when I saw it myself. Looking up at the window, there was a strange, red tinge to the reflection cast through the kitchen from the dining room, at least at first. Then suddenly the light morphed into what I can only describe as a giant, disembodied demonic head that looked to be made of flames. My eyes widened as the thing seemed to tilt its head down and look at me, and then simply grinned. I, of course, freaked out, lost it, and screamed in terror for my dad too. Eventually we calmed down and made it through the rest of the evening and started off to bed. I remember this part even more vividly than the first encounter, though I was pretty worked up and may have honestly made the next part up in my head, but it does not change what I saw when we turned in. I shared a room and some bunk beds with my sister, and there was a small bathroom attached. The toilet was just inside the door to the left, with just enough space for someone to stand by and be out of view if they desired. This is important because I laid down and grabbed my blankets. I saw a pointed, red, dark tail with a point. You know, the typical ones used in pictures of the devil, just twitching up and down. As I was lying, just waiting inside the bathroom, I said nothing and quietly turned over and did my best to go to sleep, hoping whatever it was would just go away. I also recall this other night, my sister and I shared an upstairs room, and after settling into bed, I looked out of our bedroom to the short hallway that ran between our room and our parents' room at the end of the hallway. There was a window outside that always had some light shining through it. Seeing as we lived in town, on the ceiling in the hallway, there were odd, moving shadows like water flowing over it. I admit it's entirely possible that it was raining and I was just being a frightened kid, but I do remember being terrified anyway, and when my mum came to comfort me, she said it was just dust on the ceiling. I never really thought much about it then, but now I just wonder if she produced a random explanation to calm me down. Within the last few years, I would learn more from my family. We were talking about weird experiences and the topic of the house came up. My sister's terror had been due to her seeing her recently dead cat in the window. The story was the cat got into some rat poison and died, making me wonder though, My mum also said that my sister and I were always scared of that place and could not stay upstairs due to our fear. She would also mention that at some point while my parents were sleeping, my dad started sleep talking, then rolled over, and her own description, and she doesn't make up these sort of things, is that his eyes were glowing red, and she had to yell and smack him around to get him to wake up. I can't remember much else from that house, but it really stuck with me, and I have to wonder if there are any more memories of that place that are buried deep in my mind. I moved into a duplex with my ex about 3 years ago in what we thought was a safer part of the city. One of our neighbors, Amber, works in the duplex rental office, and her husband, Ed, was at the time fresh out of prison. We would later see all the swastika tattoos and had been doing and continues to do landscape work for the rentals like mow the lawns, cut down trees, etc. Other than that, he is home, mostly doing odds and ends, things like tinkering with his mower or truck or something. They both are super nice people, very kind and loving towards each other, and always offering to help out. We've smoked weed together a few times. Ed smokes more than Amber, and have talked about all kinds of things, so I thought I could trust them and felt very safe being their neighbor. I once mentioned how sometimes when I'm home alone, I hear steps over in the attic over my room, and what sounds like a chair being dragged, how somehow the noises follow me around the house, and always freaks me out to the point of calling someone just to feel a little safer until the noises die down. Ed said, "What, you think we're spying on you?" in a laughing way, but it creeped me out a little. So then, I break up with my boyfriend, and he moves out. Ed starts texting me, asking if I wanted to smoke while Amber was still at work. I declined every time, finding different excuses because I still felt uncomfortable around him. Then he asked if I wanted to sleep with him because he thinks Amber was cheating on him. I shut that down and it was awkward as hell. I didn't tell Amber because I didn't want to get kicked out or have some horrible awkward tension, and I hate confrontation, so I kept quiet. That's when I started to hear things in the attic above my room more often. It freaked me out even more when I woke up to a loud bang outside my front door at 3 a.m. When I went to examine it, there was a small lockpick outside my door on the ground, but no one around. I kept the lockpick, and the next day texted a picture of it to Amber to let her know I thought someone was creeping around, and she said, "Oh, that's Ed's. That's his ice pick. It's not a lockpick, sweetie. No one can pick your deadbolt with that." But I know the difference in a 4-inch skinny-ass lockpick and an ice pick. I'm so scared to be alone here, especially at night. Our attic connects, and it's not outlandish to think he could be up there spying on me. I even found a freshly drilled hole in the ceiling of my room. I just put wadded up paper in it and try not to think of it. I honestly hope nothing comes of it and that I'm being paranoid. I want to share a story of what happened to me on a trip to my grandparents around Christmas time in 2015. This is something that has never happened to me since then, and never really happened to that extent before. I never spent the night at my grandparents' house very often growing up. They had a really neat ranch, and I always hated the feeling of being in the dark there, but that was it mostly. After my parents moved far away from them, things changed, and I'd spend a day or two before and a day or two after Christmas at their house. My grandmother collected lots and lots of antiques after she got married, and her house was so full of them that it was a cool place. Things became different when we made this shift to staying at my grandparents' house for a few days every year. There was this feeling of rules that I got from the house, or maybe I learnt them. I had to be in my bedroom that I always stayed in there by 11 p.m. Otherwise a feeling would well up around me. It started low and slow and would ratchet up with intensity. It would hit me even to go into the bathroom or back out the bedroom. It was like an incredible and dreadful feeling of being watched all over, combined with a silent screaming that I couldn't hear that would slowly get louder. But after 2 a.m., the feeling would be gone. One trip I decided to try and ignore it. I told my parents about the weirdness and what I'd felt, and they told me it must all be in my imagination. I was a young man who'd graduated college, so I felt really mature and had a big brain. Everyone else went to bed, and I remember sitting on a lazy-boy chair watching Full Metal Jacket on the TV. It was 11, so I was a little aware, but I just turned all the lights on. I had a really hard time focusing on the movie, and I started to feel like I was being watched. I'd looked towards the area where my brain was suggesting the attention was coming from, but there was nothing there. It continued to get worse and worse, like a heavy weight bearing down on me, and freaking me out to the point that I grabbed the remote to turn the TV off, when suddenly the feeling stopped. I was totally comfortable and thought that I had faced my fear. After 20 minutes later, a painting on the wall suddenly shifted. I was very startled, as the painting was very large and it made a thud sound. A second later, the couch from it shifted away from the wall about an inch. Suddenly, the intensity of eyes on me and the silent screaming was turned up to 11, and I remember switching off the lights and TV and fleeing to my bedroom. However, it somehow felt worse while in the bedroom, like I was being pulled by a weak force into the closet. I felt sick and remembered crying. I fought the urge and pulled and retreated to the bathroom. I shut the door and locked it, and sat on the floor by the shower opposite the door and watched the door trembling. I thought about crying for help, but my parents had made me feel so bad about things when I told them before, I knew I wasn't going to be able to share this with them. Everything again calmed for a minute, and I got on my knees and watched a pencil roll off the bathroom counter and under the door. I watched it roll down the hall and under the floor in my bedroom. I closed the bedroom door and waited. I remembered I had my phone, so I looked at the time. It was 30 minutes to 2 a.m. I waited on the floor, and when 2 a.m. came round, I felt the grip fully go, and I felt safe again. I opened the door to my bedroom and for some reason felt totally safe, and was able to once more sleep in my bed, exhausted, but feeling relieved. The next morning I woke up and went to the living room. My parents and grandparents asked me about the couch and painting, and after explaining I had no idea, I helped them put everything back. After breakfast I opened my closet door and saw a few startling things in it. A shotgun with bullets, and access up into the dark attic with the hatch fully open. And as you can imagine, I have never slept or been in that room since. My question to everyone, what the heck do you think that was? And what are your impressions? When I tell you this house has frightened skeptics, I mean it. The number of times I've been chased down the hall by something only I can hear, the voices mimicking family members from around the house, especially from the closet. Seeing family members walk around the house when you know you're home alone. People staying over, just to end up leaving in the middle of the night because there's a man at the foot of their bed that won't go away. Doors slamming shut, doorknobs shaking. I could go on for hours. We were throwing a Halloween party one year, and we all watched a woman in a nightgown walk through the backyard and vanish into the cypress tree. One night, I was boiling an egg and accidentally burnt myself with the water. Clear as a bell, I heard someone say, "Stupid cow," whispered from the dark dining room. And that's even without getting into the tapping on the windows and doors that if you go check will lead you on a wild goose chase all over the house, and the black spots on the walls by the stairs where a black head comes through the wall sometimes. This is my spouse's childhood home, and when they were little, it was way worse. They were kicked down the stairs a lot. My mother-in-law was carrying them down when they were a baby, and she got pushed down the stairs. Had she not instinctively curled around them, they would have been killed. Both of us have woken up to the feeling of someone getting into bed with us right in the middle of us. One time, a friend of my spouse's was sleeping on the couch downstairs, and she ended up sleeping in her car because she kept getting grabbed and hit. We don't even know why it's this bad. There haven't been that many owners, and as far as everyone knows, no one has died in the house. But my spouse was good friends with the neighbor's kid when they were growing up. Apparently, their house is also pretty scary. The house seems to add ghosts with time. We've always been cat people. My spouse always had cats, and it seems a few of them have stayed because we see them walking around the house a lot. It's honestly the most light-hearted thing that goes on here, and they aren't shadows either. You can tell which cat it is because of how clearly we see them. Their grandmother passed from COVID in the early days. She was a mean, miserable and scary woman, and since her passing really late at night / early in the morning, we see her wandering around upstairs, hunched and small, like she was in life. One night last December, I was up late, sick. I went to the bathroom and the doorknob started to rattle. Because she used to do that just before opening it. We always locked it, and I've never gotten out the habit. It rattled and shook until I said her name. "Helen, stop it!" Then I opened the door to go back to bed, and she was standing at the end of the hall, staring at me with a mean look, like she used to give me before she'd lash out. I pressed my back into the wall and walked the whole way back to our bedroom, never breaking eye contact. That night, we just know not to go into the backyard at this point. The lights never work, no matter how many times we replace them or rewire them. So it's pitch black out there most nights, but sometimes when you look through the kitchen window or the sliding glass doors, you'll see a big shadow person, darker than the darkness around them. The other night my spouse saw one that was around 7 feet tall, solid darkness, and then they just darted away. A few weeks ago, I was downstairs making a late night snack, and it was a beautiful full moon night. The backyard was lit up in that silvery blue way that only the moon can do, and in the pool was a hooded dark figure standing there watching me. I didn't even finish making my food. I just shut the stove off, turned out the lights and went upstairs. We're hoping to move at some point soon. This didn't happen to me, but it happened to a friend of mine. My friend's name is Willow, and this story happened when she moved into a new house. Her house was surrounded by woods and some old abandoned houses. As soon as she moved in, she started noticing weird things happening. It was usually small, almost unnoticeable, and you could only notice if you were really looking for them. It started off as only a few things going missing, which you would assume she just misplaced them. Then it moved to bigger instances, such as doors locking behind her. She was always creeped out and considered moving, but her parents always brushed it off as her imagination. Doors would slam, pictures would move, the stove would turn off and on, or she would wake up to see a shadow moving out of the corner of her eye. On the last occurrence, it was around 2:30 in the morning, and she woke up. She didn't know why she woke up, but she did. She sat up and looked around her room and noticed a figure standing slightly inside of her doorway. Naturally, she planted her ass right on her bed and didn't move an inch, which was the smartest thing to do. She stared at the figure for a few minutes until she heard light tapping sounds, like when someone drums their fingers on a desk. She tensed up, and this is where things get crazy-ish. This part sounds a bit stereotypical, I know, but all of a sudden she jerks out of bed. She doesn't see anyone because it's dark, but she feels hands on her head. Her hair is getting pulled, and she tries to scream but no noise comes out. She thrashed around, but suddenly she couldn't move. She got pulled all the way out to the living room, where whatever dropped her on the ground, and as she was looking in the darkness, a grey, strange face peered over her, grinning wide as hell. The mouth suddenly snarled and lunged towards her, and then, as the faces were right next to each other, about to touch, she woke up, gasping in her bed. Safe to say she moved out of that house and stayed with her friend for 2 weeks before she moved in with her aunt. She was 16 then, and is now 18. Her parents still live in that house, but she hasn't visited once. I grew up in Arizona, in a relatively safe city. Before myself or any of my friends had a driver's license, we would walk everywhere just to get out of the house and to do something. Typically going to Circle K for soda and snacks, or Walmart and Target to just browse around. Back when my 2 friends and I were 15, we were walking back to her house through her neighborhood around sunset. At that time, everyone in Arizona was fairly friendly. So whenever you would pass by another person or group, you would exchange hello or wave. This time in particular, we were walking past a house on a corner that had a kitchen light on, where a middle-aged man was washing his dishes. When he made eye contact with us, my natural instinct was to smile and my friend's was to wave. What a bad idea. This man immediately dropped his dishes into the sink, and what felt like a second later was outside on the corner, staring at us in an aggressive stance, with both his hands balled into fists. All of our fight and flight responses were completely different. One friend immediately took off running in the other direction. My other friend peed her pants, and I was frozen in complete fear. He began charging towards us in full force, and I'm so grateful that my friend grabbed my arm and we all started running as fast as we could. The man was well built and appeared to be in great shape and had no trouble catching up to us. As I'm running, I could hear his footsteps very close behind me. He reached out his hand to try and grab hold of my hair, but the adrenaline finally kicked in and I was able to speed off beyond his grip. After a while, I realized we were no longer being chased, and we hid in safety and called my friend's mum to pick us up and told her what happened. We gave her the location of the house and all vowed to never go near it again. In the morning, we wake up and her mum explains that she checked the address of the house and someone living there was a registered sex offender. Not sure if it was explicitly because of this incident, but my friend moved houses shortly after. All of our mums collectively agreed that we were not allowed to walk around anyone's neighborhood and that if we wanted to go out, a parent should be nearby. I completely forgot about this until I was recently talking with my friend and she brought it up. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if this man had gotten a better grip on my hair, and I'm thankful to say that we got away unharmed. At 27 today, I carry a pocket knife and pepper spray with me at all times. My grandma died when I was very young. It affected me deeply because she had been watching me at the time while my mum was out. She died in front of me, and I reacted the best I could being a child. I went to my aunt and uncle's house who lived behind me. All I knew was that something was wrong with Grandma because she'd fallen down the stairs. The EMTs came after they called 911, but nothing could be done. She had passed. For the longest time, I had trouble dealing with it. I spent the longest time blaming myself and hurting deeply over it. This has been the most traumatic experience in my life. Shortly after she died, we moved into the home she lived in to take care of my great-grandma. Though with time, it has healed as best it can. The one thing I do think about when I think of Grandma is Christmas. If there ever was a truer person that embodied the love and spirit of the season, it was my grandma. She would gather all my relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins to her house for a holiday feast and gathering together from far and near, because Grandma was pretty much the matriarch of the family. The entire glue that was our family was held together by her hands, not to mention her food. If there was one thing she could do well, it was cook, but her expertise, I think, was baking. I have fond and vivid memories of gathering apples from the apple tree in the backyard for her, where she would bake pies, crisps, and whatever else she could do with them. Though her cookies were the best. I loved my grandma's cookies, and she made the best in the world. I'll stake my life on it. I remember her kitchen always being filled with the most wonderful smells, and I recall a time during the holiday season when I was really missing her. It had been many years since she had passed, and I was still trying to come to terms with her death when I was so young. I was sitting in my bedroom thinking about it and talking to her in my head. I was feeling rather upset over it. "I miss you, Grandma," was the thought in my head at the time, when I heard a huge sound erupt from the kitchen. The sound was a clash of pots and pans, almost like someone was getting them out and tossing them on the countertops. We had cats at the time, so I assumed they were being difficult and knocking things over. So I went into the kitchen to investigate, but there was nothing. Not a cupboard opened or anything strewn about, nor was there a pot or pan out of place, as well as nothing at all on the countertops themselves. It was confusing to say the least. I shrugged it off as an odd occurrence and went back to my room. It was at that very moment that the whole house filled with the most pungent and wonderful smell of someone baking. Not just the kitchen, but the entire house itself permeated with what smelled like a mix of brownies and cookies being made. My heart was strangely warmed by it, and I'd forgotten about being sad, though it dawned on me that it wasn't just a weird occurrence. I'm convinced that it was my grandma coming back to comfort me, to let her know I was still around, to tell me she loved me in the best way she knew how. The story doesn't end on that note, however. When my mum came home from work that day, as soon as she walked through the door, she said, "It smells like someone's been baking in here." Merry Christmas, Grandma. From the ages of 13 to 16, my life was marked by inexplicable and unsettling experiences in the eerie grey one-story house I called home. Nestled near a railroad, the place had always exuded an odd vibe, making it difficult to feel at ease. Whether it was the perpetual chaos within its walls or something more supernatural, an uncomfortable tension lingered. Strange occurrences became commonplace. Footsteps echoed through the halls and whispers floated in the air. At first, I dismissed them as a product of my overactive imagination, for I was no believer in the supernatural. However, one particular night shattered my skepticism. It was 3 a.m, and though my sleep wasn't too deep, I was abruptly awakened by a blood-curdling scream directly in my ear. It felt as if someone had positioned themselves next to me, unleashing a terrifying sound. My immediate thought was to check on my niece and mother sleeping in the adjacent living room, suspecting one of them may be in distress. But to my surprise, they were both peacefully asleep, oblivious to the scream that had pierced the night. As I returned to my room, a chilling sight awaited me. A black shadow figure sat on my bed, its attention fixed on the spot where I had been sleeping. When it turned to face me, its eyes were pure white, no iris or pupil, just an unsettling void. Attempting to rationalize the situation, I convinced myself that it was a trick of the dark. However, as I neared my bed, the figure rose and silently advanced towards me. A sense of dread enveloped me as I realized this was no mere illusion. The figure, with its figureless silhouette and haunting white eyes, met me halfway between my bed and the door. Just as I grasped the reality of what stood before me, it began to fade into nothing, and in the blink of an eye it was gone, leaving me bewildered and on edge. As I lay there, attempting to shake off the encounter, the unsettling atmosphere persisted. Faint scratching sounds on the walls only added to my unease, but I chose to ignore them, desperately trying to drift back to sleep. The next morning I cautiously approached my niece and inquired about her night. She reassured me that she hadn't experienced any nightmares. Hesitant to reveal the full extent of my nocturnal ordeal, I shared only the part about me checking on them. My mother, oblivious to the supernatural, appreciated the gesture but dismissed any notion of a scream. As time passed, it became evident that my haunting experience was not isolated. My sister recounted sightings of an old woman darting in her room, and her face appeared in the glass doors by the fireplace. The landlady's deceased mother, who had lived in the house before us, was the likely candidate for the haunting. We eventually left that particular house, and with our departure, the paranormal activity ceased. Though 7 years have passed, I still wonder if this supernatural entity followed us to our new residence. Fortunately, the ambience here is markedly different, devoid of any eerie signs despite the passage of time. The memories of the old house linger forever though, etched in my mind, as a place where reality and the paranormal intersected in mysterious ways. I grew up in a house built in the 1860s in upstate New York, with zero problems. Then we bought this fixer-upper house in Virginia, built in the 80s. And let me tell you, I love scary stories, but I've never encountered so many creepy things as I have in this house. First off, 2 years ago I was nursing my son at 2 a.m. in my bed. My boyfriend always seemed to wake me up with the baby during his infant days, and would just keep us company on his phone while our son ate. We were both very awake that night, just chatting a little, and the dogs were sleeping in the living room, when suddenly we heard the dog's feet on the wooden floors, excitedly panting. Mind you, these are dogs who usually bark if someone enters the house who doesn't live there, and we both heard a man's voice mumbling in our kitchen, as if he was greeting our dogs. My boyfriend looks at me shocked, and then springs up to check, as I'm petrified, but he sees nothing in the entire house. The next occurrence happens a few months later. I'm alone in our large bedroom, just putting things away and tidying up before going to bed. As I turn off the light switch, my boyfriend walks into the room, so he passed right by me. I didn't look straight at him, but I greeted him while turning down the covers. Still no answer. Still sidetracked with plugging in my phone and such, I ask him if he's going to bed, as he was over on his side of the bed standing. He doesn't answer, but I wasn't looking at him. He likes to joke around with me, so I straight up asked, "Are you mad with me right now?" As I finally looked up, he ducks down by his side of the bed, and I seriously thought he was picking up something our son had thrown there. I asked the same question again. Then, my actual boyfriend walks into the room and goes, "Who you talking to?" I had chills over every inch of my body. He just shook his head like, "You're nuts, girl." Since then, there have been a few smaller things that have happened. My son's toy went off in the living room once with no one around it, and one morning my boyfriend came home from the night shift and our laundry basket was in the middle of the kitchen. He thought I'd moved it before bed, but I assured him I had no reason to do so. The reason I'm sharing this now is that I was just cooking in the kitchen and heard whistling from behind me. And earlier today, I heard a human adult cough upstairs, and I'm freaking out. My neighbor is friends with the previous owner's first wife, and she used to live in our home. While she was visiting, I took the opportunity to ask if she'd ever experienced anything in the home. She laughed and said, "Oh yeah, that's just Jimmy's brother," Jimmy being her ex-husband. I finally felt so validated knowing I'm not crazy. Our neighbor is an old man, maybe in his 60s or 70s, and he lives all alone in his house. It's a dump. Weeds climbing the tall walls with paint peeling and water stains covering the surface. His bedroom window is right across from mine, so if I were to look outside, I would most likely see into his room and vice versa. Our story begins at 11 p.m. I was sitting at my desk, which faces the window, and decided to look up from my book. And out the window, I noticed that the lights were on in John's room, and I didn't think much of it at first. But then I noticed a little flash coming from the corner of the window. It looked a little closer, and I realized that these were the man's spectacles reflecting off of something. But more disturbingly, the man was watching me. I don't know how long he was watching for or why, but I was creeped out beyond all description, so I closed my blinds and went to sleep. Tomorrow, I was thinking of going round to ask why he was watching me. After this point, seeing the old man had become less of a joy and more of a fear. He would ask me deep and kind of disturbing questions. I believe he once asked me as I was taking my dog for a walk, "If you could, would you ever skin a child?" and other stuff I don't want to mention. Now I was in my room again. I had caught the old man watching me a few times, but since it was 2 a.m., I decided to open the blinds. Surely he was asleep, and I could enjoy watching the stars. I slowly pulled my blinds up, but to my horror the man was still awake. And worse yet, he had moved a rocking chair to the window where he could watch me. His lights were off, but it was clear he was still awake. I shut the blinds back and turned my light out. I hear a curse from beyond my window, then silence, and decided that I would not look out of that window again. Last night, I was laying on my bed, sleep not coming to me. It had been a busy day, and I was processing everything that happened when I heard something hit my window. I assumed it was a bird or something, so I closed my eyes again. But that's when I heard a second bang from my window. This time I got up and slowly peeked out of the blinds. My neighbor wasn't in his window, so I thought it would be safe to open my blinds completely. And what I saw next shocked me. I looked around and didn't see anything, until I looked down. There was the man, in our yard, smiling. His grin was wide, his teeth were yellow, and his eyes were glinting in the moonlight. That was it. I slammed the blinds shut and ran to my parents' room. I told them about the man next door, and everything that had happened in the past 3 months. They calmed me down, and told me they were going to go look out my window. And so they did. But in the time it took for me to explain to them and for them to calm me down, he had retreated back to his room and lay sleeping in his rocking chair away from the window. My parents chalked it up to sleep paralysis, and so I went back to sleep. But in the morning, I had received the best news of my life. I was awoken at 7 a.m. by the sound of the doorbell. I groggily got up and put my clothes on, which is important as I genuinely sleep naked, which makes it even weirder that he's always staring. I went downstairs and my parents turned around and told me that John had told them he was moving away and he would be gone by noon. I felt safe in my room once again, and I wonder if there was an agent involved in ensuring this happened. I personally have no recollection of this event. This was told to me by my mother and was confirmed by my father, who is the most non-spiritual paranormal person I have ever known. You don't want to talk about ghosts with him. He's strictly scientific, and if one doesn't provide a DNA sample, it does not exist. So during the Christmas holidays, years ago, my parents were sleeping in their bedroom sometime in the early morning hours, when they suddenly awoke, and noticed that the room where my crib was illuminated with a bright white light. They immediately thought that a burglar or someone had entered the home, so both my parents jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway outside of my crib room. Before they could enter my crib room, a ball of bright white light exited the room and went into the hallway. Instead of panicking or being frightened, they both said that when the light came out of the crib room, they felt the most peaceful sense of well-being and happiness. All the fear they initially felt had vanished, and they just stood there, watching this ball of light, not moving. They watched the ball of light float out of my crib room, through the hallway and then down the stairs, where it disappeared around the corner into the living room. My parents hurried down the stairs to see where the ball of light went, but it was gone. However, once they were downstairs in the living room, they saw the angel ornament atop the Christmas tree had been knocked over. I have asked if there was a window open in my bedroom, thinking it might have been ball lightning, but they said no. However, I wonder how good memories are about particular details years later. My mother says she believed it to be an angel, and my father says he doesn't know what it was, but it was an incredible and unexplainable experience. If my mother had told me this, I would kind of wonder if it actually happened. But the very fact that my father confirmed this story, and knowing how he thinks, I have to believe their account. Whether it was an angel, I doubt that, because I don't believe in angels as described in the Bible. Nevertheless, I find that the sudden change in the feeling to be extremely intriguing. If I were to see a ball of light, and it was in the room of my child, I'd probably freak out. But my parents went from being panicked to being utterly at peace. I don't know what that was, and have not been able to find similar accounts, but I would love any links or hear comparable experiences regarding this ball of light, if anyone could share it with me. When I rented a house in Waterbury, Connecticut, I came to the delightful discovery that it was haunted. Shortly after I moved in, my roommate and I became aware the house had a problem. The rear family room was temporarily half filled with unpacked boxes from the move. I was in my bedroom upstairs on the left side of the hallway, and my roommate took one of the bedrooms on the right. I heard the entry door open and slam shut, followed by footsteps on the tiled floor, and the sound of a little girl sobbing. Weird. Goosebumps went up my body, and all the hairs on my arms and neck raised up. I held my breath and listened more intently. The crying seemed to fade away, and then I was startled by my roommate walking into the hallway out of his bedroom. I asked him, "Did you hear that?" And he looked at me confused. "What?" I told him what I heard, and he said he hadn't. Great, maybe I'm just crazy or tired from the move. I get up from my chair and walk to the hallway and look downstairs and see all the lights are off. My roommate tells me this is his doing because we were upstairs. Why would we have the lights on downstairs? I tell him I'm going to go investigate the sounds and creep down the steps and run my hands on the wall looking for the light switch. First night in the new house. I find the light switch and end up flicking everything on. It's by the front door, so the porch light went on too. I look around and see another light switch down the hall next to the closet and the dark dining room. I flick on the light switch and walk in there. The room was freezing cold, and I see the back door. I click the switch by the back door, and the outside light goes on. I look into the family room, where I heard the sound coming from, and an eerie feeling washes over me, but I can't see anything. I then go to the living room and kitchen, click every damn switch I find. I can now see every room has light, but I find nothing. My roommate calls over to me from the second room, sarcasm in his voice. "Any ghosts or intruders?" I scan the house one more time, whatever's in my line of vision, and reply, "No." Close all the lights and head back upstairs, severely creeped out. Another occasion, my roommate was talking to his brother on the phone, and he was going to visit the next morning and check out the new place. Nothing happened that night, but in the morning, I woke up from the front door opening and slamming shut. I sat up in my bed as I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, my bedroom door wide open. The top of the stairs is where my bedroom door is. No one can get by without me seeing them. The loud steps getting closer, I wait and remember my roommate's brother is supposed to visit. As the footsteps are now at the top of the stairs, I hear my roommate call out his brother's name. Dead silence. I call out his brother name too. Nothing. No response whatsoever, nor footsteps. I get out of bed and walk to the doorway. I see my roommate across the hall just reach his doorway. No one is on the stairs. No one else is in the house. Just me and my roommate looking at each other in an empty staircase. We make eye contact and he says, "You heard that, right? The door, the footsteps. What the hell? Let me just check the house." So I run down the front door and see it's still locked. I call out, "Your brother doesn't even have a key. How could he get inside?" I can see the closet door from where I'm standing, and it's slowly opening like an inch or two. I gasp, frozen. Fight or flight kicks in, so I run into the closet violently and open the door to see nothing inside. I slam it shut, searched the house and found nothing. His brother did end up coming over, but much later, afternoon. We told him, and he said he didn't want to stay and got a bit scared. He said we needed to bless the house. I lived there for a little over a year and always heard doors, assuming it was my roommate. Oftentimes, I'd hear footsteps too. One night I was laying in bed and felt something enter my room, walk up to bed, crawl in bed with me and put an arm around my waist. Cuddle ghost? Because no one was there when I turned to see who the hell was cuddling me. This is my first time sharing this, and I hope some of you will believe me. About 20 years ago, my 2 children and I rented an apartment. This apartment was on the top floor of a home built in 1910. Everything was fine at first, until after a few nights, once we had settled in for some sleep. I thought I was dreaming about my children, but woke up, their noises very much real. I went to check on them, but they were both asleep, yet the noises persisted. I managed to get back to sleep, but the sounds resumed. I would hear footsteps running across the ceiling, giggling, and laughter. The next day I went to the attic to check things out, but found nothing out of place. That was very bizarre. That night the sounds came back. A few days later, I met my downstairs neighbors, so I asked them about it. The whole building was allegedly haunted by multiple entities. For them, they would have their lights shut off, their faucet turn on and be left running, as well as the apparitions of shadow figures. So we just accepted it. At the time, I'd also experienced my fair share of paranormal activity from my own family. This went on for a while, until we moved into a home I'd bought. It would appear that one of these spirits managed to come with me. We ended up naming it Nout, and now if something goes missing, we kindly ask him to return it. We'll wait a few minutes, and it'll appear somewhere obvious. The cats adore Nout as well. At least, those other kids that haunted the attic stayed behind in that apartment. This happened around summer in the year 2000 in the Midwest USA, and I was a 12-year-old boy. I was shy and never did well with confrontation. Anytime I was scared, I'd find myself shaking. One day, my dad and cousin were weightlifting in the garage and it was open. I then decided to grab my bicycle out of the garage and ride up and down the street while my dad and cousin lifted. As I'm pedaling away from the house, I see another kid riding his bike probably 5 to 6 houses down from mine, but he's just kind of going in circles. I maybe get like 20 feet near him, but that's it. No words were exchanged, not even a wave or a nod. I just kept my head down and kept pedaling. On my next circle back down the street, that's when things got weird. I get near the area where the kid had been riding, and he's not around anymore, so I guess he went inside or wherever he lived. Right as I'm about to turn around and head towards my house, which is about 80 to 100 yards away, I hear a man yell, "Hey, in an unsettling tone. I look up, and a man is standing in his front doorway probably 25 feet from me, as I'm paused on the street with my bike. He's one of the creepiest looking dudes I've ever seen in my life. He has on a ball cap, and he's wearing these Jeffrey Dahmer looking glasses. Tan, burnt orange, dirty looking wrinkled skin, and had to be in his 40s. He looks straight out of a horror movie, and he just has this sinister, angry look on his face. He then says, "If you say anything to my son again, I'm gonna run your ass over." At this point I was crying and frozen in fear, but then I start biking home faster than ever. I'd never been in any situation like this. I couldn't believe what happened because I'd never even said anything to that boy. So I opened the garage, where my dad and cousin are still lifting, and tell them this story. They decide to go to this guy's house and address. My dad and cousin had a few beers and were pretty jacked, so they're ready to tussle if needed. He goes straight to the guy's door with my cousin behind him and knocks loudly. The man opens the door and has this huge Rottweiler by his side, barking and going crazy. The man threatens to let the dog loose, but my dad and cousin aren't cowering down one bit. After a bit of bickering for a minute, the guy goes inside his house and shuts the door. Nothing else happened that night, and we walk back home. A few days pass, and now I'm getting to the creepier part. During the summer, when my parents worked during the day, my grandma would come over and babysit my little brother and I. We were about 10 minutes from downtown, and my grandma was going to make us grab food at Sonic. We get in her car and start driving down the road towards Creepy Dude's house. This made me feel uneasy, but that's the direction we needed to travel in. As we get closer to the house, the hairs on my neck stand on end. As we go by, I see him sitting in a red truck in his driveway, facing the road like he's about to pull out. I don't remember well, but I think he may have even worn a grin on his face. We pass the house and he pulls out behind us. I start freaking out a bit, so I tell my grandma the story about the man driving behind us. At first, my grandma was chill about it, but then I notice she seems to be a bit shaken. This is because she had made 6 to 7 turns to throw him off our trail, but he kept following us, literally every turn. At this point, me and my brother are in the back seat with our heads down as he follows us, but luckily, we made it to downtown where it was busy. We get near the police station, and that's where he takes another turn. Then finally, he just passes on by. I never saw the man again. My mum and dad split up, and we left that neighborhood 2 years later with my mum to move to the country. My dad still lives at the same house, and I wonder if the dude stuck around for a while, or if he even lives there. What was his intent? Was it just a coincidence, or did he plan on following us? It was so weird how he was just waiting for us in his driveway to pass us by. My sister is 2 years older than me. I was approximately 15 when this occurred, so she must have been around 17. It was Christmas Eve 2004, and we were stuck at my grandmother's house in Michigan. My grandmother was at her home in Florida, but my family stayed at her Michigan house to be near other families in the area for the holiday. It was painfully boring that night, and my parents had gone out to dinner with other adults. That meant it was just me, my sister, and our little brother who was about 5 years old at the house. I remember putting my brother to bed and going to sit on the couch so that I could plug my new laptop into the internet. Suddenly, my sister in the living room starts yelling to get out of her spot. She wanted to plug the internet. I didn't know what I said, but I'm sure I didn't want to give up the internet spot without a fight. Nothing was physical, but the yelling woke my brother, and I put him back to bed and returned to the living room area. At that point, my sister was in the kitchen. She looked at me, apologized, and offered me the internet plug, and I was surprised, as she never apologizes. But after all that, I had decided to go to bed and spend the rest of the night texting my boyfriend. so I cautiously accepted her apology but declined. She then proceeded to try and convince me to sit there. When I reiterated that I was going to bed, it was like a switch went off. She didn't say anything, but I could see it in her eyes. Those eyes changed and suddenly were focused at the butcher block of knives. The next thing I know, she's reaching for the knives which were between us. I grabbed the Windex bottle that happened to be next to me and sprayed her face before turning and running down the hall. As I ran, I could hear her yelling at me and coming down the hallway too. I went into the first room I came across, which was a bathroom, and locked the door. Within seconds, she was banging on the door. I called my parents and told my sister they were coming. For 10 minutes, she tried to break down the door, but suddenly there was silence. What broke the silence was her voice, apologizing again. This time I knew better and stayed away. When my parents arrived, there was a butcher knife under the couch pillow, directly in front of the bathroom in which I was hiding. It was then that I realized the internet spot she wanted to give me faced away from the kitchen. I have no doubt she planned to kill me. My dad bought the neighbor's house when I was around 12. The neighbors built it in the 70s, so we knew no one had passed away in there or anything, but we have no idea what may have happened to the land before that. Before we even moved in, the neighbor's son woke up in the middle of the night, all blades flying off his ceiling fan. Multiple blades got stuck in the wall and one in the closet door. He ran to the closet and screamed until his parents came. There were still marks when they filled the holes in and we moved in. That room became my baby brother's nursery, and one day my stepmom needed to change him, but she didn't want to go all the way to the bedroom, so she asked for me to grab the diapers and wipes. When I walked into the room, a book flew off a stack of boxes that we hadn't unpacked and landed right in front of me directly under the fan. I stepped over it, grabbed what I needed, and ran out of that room. Multiple people in my family saw a shadow of a man in the hallway. The hallway was a long L-shaped hallway with only 2 lights. Me and 2 of my brothers slept in that room, at the very tip of the short side of the L. My dad's room was across from ours, and my baby brother's nursery was in between. We would see the man at the end of the hallway. We could never reproduce the shadow. It wasn't always there, and we had a tapestry on the wall right where he stood, and the shadow would be on top of the tapestry. One night when I was watching a movie and my 2 brothers were asleep, I saw the shadow of a man crawling into the room in the darkness. I thought it was my dad trying to scare us, which he often did, but he then opened the door to his room and there was nothing there. Scared the absolute crap out of me, that did. There was also a woman that my dad and stepmom saw in the house, but I never saw her. She would peek around corners, and you could see her long hair swish. It scared my stepmom so bad one time, she fell while getting into the shower and broke a rib. Many of us also saw a little boy who would run through the dining room. I would catch glimpses of him out of the corner of my eyes, but my stepmom woke up one night to him standing over her before running off down the hallway. She said she would have written it off as one of my brothers, but the hallway had wood floors and there were no footsteps as he ran off. Eventually, my older brother moved into my dad's office. I got the nursery as my bedroom, and my 2 younger brothers started sharing the room with the bunk beds. One night, I was reading when my closet door randomly began opening and closing on its own. I said out loud, "Can you please not do this in my room?" It stopped, and miraculously, I never had any issues in my room again after that. My youngest brother, however, was about 2 or 3 now and began acting weird. He would walk out his bedroom and sit in the living room, and when asked why he wasn't in his room, he would say, "The man was in there." My dad obviously ran into the room, worried about an intruder, but there was no one there. This happened a few more times until one day my little brother walked straight into the closet by the front door, where his little baseball bat was. and when he was asked what he was doing, he said he was going to get the man out of his room. My dad just let him be, and he never talked about the man after that. I have so many more stories about that house. Weirdly enough, one of my brothers never saw anything, and my older brother only experienced a few things moving without explanation. When my dad moved, I was around 17. It all stopped. I didn't experience anything for a few years until I moved into a house in college with my boyfriend and another friend. But it was totally different. Doppelgangers, a helpful entity, and weird sightings of shadow people. My cousin also built a house on a piece of land they later found out was an abandoned graveyard that the developers reworked. I only visited once, but I saw a few things. They moved out pretty quickly. According to my grandmother, who had lots of issues and was an addict, so take it all with a grain of salt, the women in our family are sensitive to spirits, but it skips a generation. She claimed she was sensitive, her grandmother was, and when I told her about my dad's house, she said it was likely I was too. Our family is from New Orleans, so people really believe in that stuff here, and after years and years and hundreds of experiences, I can't deny that she may have been onto something. I had just returned from San Francisco and could not shake that something happened to me at City Lights bookstore. It's a staple of the beatnik culture. Lawrence Ferlinghetti opened the store in the 50s, and it still attracts people with its poetic charm. My first visit was last weekend, and I was on the second story in the poetry room when I felt someone tug my hair. I had it in a low ponytail. I thought it was my boyfriend, maybe signaling that he wanted to exit. I shrugged it off as kind of rude and kept looking at the spines of the books atop of the shelves. All of a sudden, he grabbed my pony and wrenched my head to the left. I began yelling. I was very annoyed. "Stop! What's your—" I stopped mid-sentence because I saw my boyfriend was across the room. There was no one else in the room with us. I was completely dumbfounded. I tried to shake it off, but I went to check my books out and pay my tab and asked the bookkeeper if this place was haunted. She replied with a very firm yes, but even more unsettlingly, she adds that the activity had gotten much more apparent since the seance they performed a month prior. My skin gets chills just thinking about it. What could have this been besides a haunting? Does anyone have any rational explanations for me? I am a 24-year-old female and live with my 23-year-old roommate in an apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta. As you may know, Atlanta is super dangerous and crime-riddled right now, so we have a Ring peephole camera perfect for apartments and a digital lock on our door for safety. About 3 months ago, the sweet family across the hall moved out, and we got a new neighbor, David. Let's just say that David is interesting. When we first saw him moving in, we were a bit taken aback by the sheer amount of stuff he was trying to fit into his one-bedroom apartment. All of it was anime merch and Star Wars memorabilia. Definitely gives me hoarder vibes, but not my business. When the moving trucks left and a few days had passed, my roommate and I knocked on his door to give him a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket with some baked goods, dog treats, and poop bags for his dog and seasonal candle. Apparently, this was not the correct thing to do. After that day, David got creepy. It started out innocent enough. He would come to the door whenever he heard me or my roommate coming, or go to have a quick chat. Or he would come over regularly to ask for salt or sugar or toilet paper. Sometimes he would ask if we could come over and watch his dog. Within the past 2 weeks, things have really escalated from the mundane. 2 weekends ago, we were out pretty late partying at the bars near the Brave Stadium. We ended up getting home at around 3 a.m., only to find David sitting at the top of the stairs waiting for us. He acted all upset, asked us where we'd been and requested that we tell him if we're planning to be out past midnight. I laughed in his face, and he called me a mindless Stacy. Still not sure what that means. He also asked for access to our Ring camera so he could make sure we're safe. We laughed at him again and went into our apartment. Here's the scary part. We checked the Ring the next morning, and he sat outside his apartment staring at our door for the rest of the night. When we saw that, we contacted the complex to let them know he was acting crazy. They told us to contact the police, so we did. The police told us to contact them if he made any threats, but since we lived in a shared space, they couldn't do anything until he entered our apartment or threatened us. I assumed the complex said something to him because he left us alone for the next 5 days or so. This week, he's out of control. He's constantly sitting outside of our apartment. My roommate has started leaving for work an hour early, so she doesn't cross paths with him. I cannot leave our apartment during the day because he is constantly waiting outside for me. He has asked me out, left love letters on our door, on our cars, and our mailbox. I told him once I wasn't interested, and he told me that he would end his life if I didn't go on a date with him. Of course, I didn't have it in writing, so the police wouldn't do anything. He also has put up a Ring doorbell of his own, so that he can track all of our movements, and will leave really creepy sexual notes when we're gone, and find them when we come back. What the hell do we do? We met with our landlord last week. Unfortunately, they weren't willing to work with us as much as we were expecting. They will not remove him from his unit, and since we didn't want to spend a ton of money to move, we asked if we could move units within the complex. The landlord offered us a 1-bedroom unit on terrace level, so my roommate and I would have had to share a room, in what is basically the basement, so not ideal. We spoke to the police, and they said that the notes and letters weren't enough to get someone on a stalking or harassment, especially since he lives literally 3 feet away from us. They did keep the Ring video, and said they would contact us sometime after they'd reviewed the footage. We have both moved in with my parents for the time being. It really sucks spending $2,000 a month on a place you can't live. We're actually looking for another apartment, but money's tight since we had to buy out the current lease and start a new one. Also not ideal. This happened back in 2016, during Christmas week. I was in 9th grade back when my parents took me to Mexico. I was genuinely excited but scared because of how much crime there was there, allegedly. Right when we get to Michoacan, I notice that where my grandma lives is by the end of a road in that village, and past the end of the road is nothing but huge hills. I asked my grandma what was past the hills, and she would just say that farmers would take their goats over there to eat the grass. Fast forward to nighttime, when I was asleep. I woke up so suddenly at 2:37 a.m. and started looking around to see what had woken me, but I couldn't find a possible answer as to why I was awoken, so I sat back down. I began scrolling on Facebook when I started to hear horse hooves stomping on concrete with chains being dragged on it. I got back up and listened closely and heard the horse screaming as if it had been startled, but I swear it sounded as if the horse's screams were right in that room. And I remember the horse was walking, but it seemed as if it didn't want to move away from our gate. It was as if it was only targeting my relative's house. 5 minutes later, I recall my mum saying, "Son, go back to sleep. It's the devil." The very next day, I asked my mum about what happened at night, and she said she heard it too, but she knew it wasn't a farmer since they all have a strict code of not being outside past certain hours. I don't believe it was a farmer, because if it would, I would have heard his herd of sheep as well. Could it have been the devil on a horse? I first moved into my college home when I was 19. The house was built in 1926, and I live in a pretty sketchy area. I would hear, see, and feel things somewhat frequently in the home. It's an old house. I will normally just say aloud that this is my home. I don't welcome anything negative here whatsoever, and then I won't have any other experiences for a few months. I've only ever been truly scared inside the house once. I was in the bathroom, getting ready for a date, and I saw and heard the doorknob of the bathroom jiggle, like someone was trying to come in. I assumed my fiancé was just picking on me. I opened the door, and he wasn't there. He was in his office playing computer games. I told my fiancé multiple times about seeing and hearing things. I very frequently get that feeling on the back of my neck, like there's something in the room with me when I'm alone, or I'm being watched. He always just laughs and never believes me. Until this morning. We were both upstairs in bed. I was asleep. He was lying awake on his phone. Both of our dogs were asleep as well. There was this loud thud at about 3:30, maybe just before. It woke me and the dogs up. One of our dogs barked once, and the second was growling. My fiancé immediately jumped up, looked out the window and didn't see anything. He stepped out of the room and came back in, grabbed his gun, and told me to call the cops. The look on his face when he came back into the room told me everything I needed to know. Someone was inside our house. I called the cops. We both armed ourselves and we stayed on the line with the operator. He insists he heard and felt someone walking around downstairs, so much that he had me call the police, and he would never do that unless he genuinely thought someone was actually there. It took less than 5 minutes for 3 cops to arrive, and they had us meet them on the front porch. They came through and declared the whole house, other than the room that had the doggies in it, were empty. They couldn't find anything that could have made the noise. All the doors were dead-bolted, nothing downstairs was touched. The robot vacuum was stuck in the corner, but it wouldn't have made a noise that loud, and I went to check the app, and it had shut off at 3 on the dot. We looked everywhere, and couldn't find anything or replicate the noise at all. He stood at the top of the steps, and had me walk through the house, and he said it sounded exactly like it when I was walking, as if I was trying to sneak through the house, coming from the living room into the dining room. We can't explain it at all. We're used to hearing bangs and stuff outside and creaks in the house because it's old. But he said it sounded and felt exactly like someone was walking around downstairs, and the initial thud sounded like someone slamming on our doors downstairs with a vibration through the house. We do have cameras that didn't pick up any movement, unfortunately. And one more thing. He and I had just talked on Sunday afternoon about how I am convinced the house is haunted, and he denounced it entirely. So what are the odds that this would happen at 3:30 a.m. the following morning, when only he was awake? Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? If you're a cop, would you be annoyed responding to this call? We feel so bad and they probably think we're crazy. But can anyone try and help debunk this explanation? This didn't happen to me personally, but my parents when they initially started dating, and always remained skeptics even after their encounter. My mum was living with my grandparents and was getting ready to go out on a date with my dad, as they had just met. She let him in the house, told him to sit in the lounge, and that she was going back upstairs to finish drying her hair, and that she would be right back. My dad sat on the chair in the lounge, and to the right of him could see the door straight into the kitchen. The door was wide open, so no reflections, and he could see a man standing in the sink, no less than 10 feet away from him, quietly leaning at the sink, seeming like he was washing up. My dad was a bit shy initially, and as the man didn't acknowledge him, he just sat patiently waiting for my mum. When my mum returned, my dad quietly asked, "Who's that man in the kitchen?" My mum shook her head, perplexed, and said they were all alone. Bear in mind, the stairs are in the kitchen, and my mum would have seen them on the way down if anyone was in there. They shrugged it off and thought nothing more of it. A few weeks later, my dad was looking at some of my mum's family photos and spotted one of her granddad and said, "Oh, that's him, the bloke who was in here the other week at the sink." My mum asked him if he was sure, to which he said he was. My mum was in shock and revealed that her grandfather had died a few years earlier, and that is the person he claimed to have seen that evening. When I was around 20 years old, I started getting love letters in the mail. At first, there was no return address. Eventually, the third letter I received was from my much older, mentally unstable neighbor. He expressed how much he loved and needed me, and wanted a family and so on. He told me he'd been watching me since I was a little girl. That part creeped me out. I've been knowing him my whole life, and never had a clue. I don't know how he knew where I worked, but there were a few times he would sit on the bench down the street from my job and watch me walk to my car. He sat on that bench still as a rock, and only followed me with his eyes. After that, I told my dad and grandfather and they went to talk to him, and eventually it stopped, and he basically fell off the face of the earth. Never seen him since. To this day I often wonder, when I was playing as a little girl outside, what if he'd kidnapped me? I'm thankful he never made a move from that time forward, and it's left me very aware of my surroundings. When I was 13, I was passing a football on Christmas Eve with a friend outside. My family used to always have a Christmas Eve party, so my buddy and I thought we'd go out front to toss the ball and get some air. It was great weather, snowing slightly, cloudy sky reflecting the city lights, and it was pretty warm out. I remember it all being very pleasant. As we were passing the ball around, something incredibly odd occurred. The whole street, or as far as either of us could see, flashed white several times. We both thought that it was super weird, and it wasn't isolated to one of us. We both experienced this intense flash multiple times. We looked around and couldn't figure out what it might have been. I joked, aliens, but we went back inside to ask if anyone had taken pictures and no one had. We were also the only people on the block having a party that year. We never did figure out what it could have been, and if anyone else has ever experienced anything remotely like it, I'd love to hear from you. It's something that has stumped me for the longest time. This particular tale unfolds within the walls of my family home, a structure rooted in the late 60s. To the best of our knowledge, no one has met their demise within these confines. Nevertheless, the abode is a haven for bizarre occurrences, with items vanishing and reappearing, doors asserting their autonomy, and sporadic cold spots manifesting throughout. An eclectic assortment of inexplicable phenomena. However, my favorite enigma transpires within my room, formerly belonging to my grandparents. Engaged in the task of redecorating and infusing my essence into the space, I faced the challenge of dismantling substantial wall adornments, 3 rather unsettling religious heavy metal engravings, and a sizable wooden cross, a relic I tolerate though it doesn't particularly align with my taste. After replacing these items with my preferred decor, life resumed its usual course, until an eerie incident disrupted the norm. In the dead of night, I found myself abruptly awoken by the discerning sound of minute, weighty footsteps scampering beneath my bed. Pondering the possibility of it being a rodent, I cautiously investigated, armed with my phone's flashlight, ready to capture this intruder on video. To my bewilderment, there was nothing under the bed, and the ominous sound had vanished into thin air. Convinced it might be a fleeting dream, I returned to slumber. However, the same disconcerting phenomena reoccurred the following night and the night after that. Rationalizing that no rat could elude my feline huntress, I took a pragmatic step, restating the substantial wooden cross on one wall, accompanied by my risque literature and assortment of eerie masks. While the decorations exuded an unsettling aura, the mysterious footsteps ceased, leaving me to ponder the peculiar balance between the supernatural and tangible in my enigmatic abode. When I was 6 years old, my family was helping my grandmother move out of her apartment. When we were all done, my mother asked me to go get my red zip-up hoodie. I had left it in the back room and went through the entryway of the house past the kitchen and living room down the hall to the bedroom I left my jacket in. It wasn't there. I found the ivory crocodile figurine that my grandmother gave me in the bathroom. Then I walked through the hall as I passed the living room again. I saw my jacket in the middle of the floor and froze. There were 6 shadows walking around my jacket in a full circle. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. They must have made 2 full circles before I finally found some courage to move and turned towards the front door and started running. I swear I could feel them all stop and turn towards me, and I could feel someone trying to stop me running, but I kept going. Once I got out of the house, I ran to my mum crying. She said she believed me, and that we had to leave right away, which is what we did. Be wary of your neighbors. When I was 12, I used to go to a summer camp with my cousin who was 6 at the time. Let me backtrack a bit. My cousin is actually my mum's cousin, because my grandmother's sister had her only kid. So even though I was older than her, she was my older cousin. Anyway, we both frequented our great-grandmother's house and ventured to the camp from her house. Now, there was an old neighbor next to my great-grandmother's house called Mike. My family had told me that he was a creep and had a history of making people uncomfortable in the neighborhood, to the point where people purposefully avoided the street he lived on. Mike was also a man of very few words, and he was older, I'd say 50s or 60s, as he had visibly grey hair. One day, me and my cousin Susan were walking to the summer camp when I felt someone following us. Without alarming Susan, I quickly looked over my shoulder and at first didn't see anything, until I noticed Mike was walking from behind the car. I quickened my pace and pulled Susan along and cut through a walkway to see him pick up the pace. I couldn't scare my cousin, so I kept moving, darting between different pathways while trying to outpace Mike. Knowing that I was a few minutes away from camp, I told my cousin to go through the gates while I turned to confront him. He stopped me and turned back. I immediately reported this to my parents and Susan's mum. They confronted him and he denied any wrongdoing, and we threatened to call the cops. Now it's 2020, and he's long dead with his house boarded up and tore down, a relic of a time period. Me and my cousin are both adults now, and that will haunt us. The fear of having to protect myself and my cousin brought out the fight or flight response. Always watch your neighbors. You'll never know who's watching you. About 3 years ago, my ex-boyfriend, his 2 friends, my brother and I went on a night hike. This place is an old abandoned amusement park off the side of a mountain with access up to the mountain from the amusement park location. This place is quite well known to the locals, and most smart people hike there during the day. My ex-boyfriend had this photo that he asked his friends to send him. At first glance, I assumed his friend photoshopped the picture. I was skeptical because who the heck just takes a random picture of nothingness? I live in a pretty cold state, so we are all bundled up and headed to the torn asphalt towards the amusement park. I still remember the air feeling quite still. There was a snowstorm predicted to happen on Christmas Day, so the air had this creepy stillness to it which made it a lot more exciting. As we headed up the grassy hill, passing the amusement park and towards the mountain, things were getting a little tense. My ex-boyfriend, who's my ex for very specific reasons, brought along his beloved PBRs. The higher we up the hillside of the mountain, the drunker he got. When we finally reached the top, they came across a radio tower. This excited my ex and my brother for some reason, because they needed to climb it. I started panicking and telling them to get down. At this point, it started misting out. It seemed like the start of a storm. The air was electrifying, and I was extremely anxious. I realized I couldn't change their minds, so I decided to walk away. I couldn't stand the idea of seeing my brother plummet to the ground or get electrocuted. I walked away and towards the tree line. I walked until I reached the side of the rocky cliff. It was more comforting to be alone even in the darkness. I stood there enjoying the view of the many streetlights twinkling down below. I remember taking deep breaths and just feeling a lot less anxious. That view is always beautiful during the day, but at night it's a whole new experience. It was until my ex and the whole crew came to join me, except their idea of joining me was to hang off the side of the cliff, like literally cliffhanger style. Maybe they were inspired by those parkour videos. This set me off, especially since my ex peer pressured my brother into doing it. I started to raise my voice and demand them to stop. My ex found a small ledge off the side of the cliff to stand on, and he yelled at me to come over here right now and that I needed to see this. I looked over the side and saw the descent our bodies would have to travel until finally reaching rock bottom. He started pushing me to stand on the small ledge. After some time, a stupid past version of me decided to give in, and I inched my way down to the ledge. He told me to turn around and look at the view. I felt like I wanted to cry. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said. All that I could think about was the possibility of plummeting. I wanted to climb back up to safety. I felt dizzy like the world around me was spinning, and finally I climbed back up. My ex-boyfriend's foot slipped in front of me, and I surely thought that's when it was all over. But he was able to catch himself and I was just hyperventilating. I started to bawl my eyes out. They wouldn't stop playing cliffhangers. My ex yelled at me and claimed I was crying in order to get attention from his two friends. This angered me. I tried to explain myself, but of course he wouldn't listen. I was afraid for their lives. I was very shaken up and angry, and decided to speed walk away from the mental abuse. I walked and didn't look back, and made my way through the bush and down the grassy hillside. I walked until I couldn't hear the ridicule from my ex or his criticizing laughter, and finally I was alone by myself with my overactive thoughts, with no light but just the moon above me, as well as a dead cell phone. 20 minutes later, I reached the bottom of the hill. The abandoned amusement park buildings were to the left of me. I had a clear view of the street in front of me. About a football field away, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. A figure made up of light, almost floating up the street and towards the amusement park. The figure couldn't have been some car lights, because the gates to the amusement park were locked up. This was far from civilization to be illuminating anything. It was a figure, and a very tall one, about half the size of the trees around it. The figure illuminated the trees around it. It had massive wings. I distinctly saw what I saw as soon as I saw it. I crouched down into a ball with my head between my knees and cradled my head with my arms, and I just wept. I was extremely scared and alone with no phone juice, and I was afraid this would have seen me or something. I was just too scared to look up, and I sat there sobbing quietly, waiting to hear something. After about 10 minutes, I heard my boyfriend singing his stupid, drunkard song from a distance. When they saw me crying, he automatically assumed I was still upset, but when I explained what I had seen, they surprisingly believed me. We stood there staring out into the distance and finally decided to carry on walking. Well, after he realized he lost the knife he had on his person, and he decided to run up the hill to find it. He then ran down the hill after realizing it was no use, and ended up tumbling down the hill and hitting quite a few rocks on his way down. Interesting night. We made it back to my car, but got very little sleep. It was probably the worst Christmas Eve ever. I grew up in a house built in the 1860s in upstate New York with zero problems. We bought this fixer-upper house here in Virginia built in the 80s, right before COVID. And let me tell you, I love scary stories, but have never encountered so many creepy things as I have in this house. First of all, 2 years ago, I was nursing my son at around 2 a.m. in our bed. My boyfriend always seemed to wake up with me and the baby during his infant days, and would just keep us company on his phone while our son ate. We were both very awake that night, chatting a little, and the dogs were sleeping in the living room. Suddenly, we hear the dog's feet on the wooden floor and excitedly panting. Mind you, these are dogs who usually bark if someone enters the house who doesn't live there. Then we both hear a man's voice mumbling in our kitchen as if he's greeting our dogs. My boyfriend looks at me shocked and then springs up to check. As I'm petrified, he sees nothing in the entire house. The next occurrence happens just a few months later. I'm alone in our large bedroom just putting things away and tidying things up before getting into bed. As I turn off the light switch, my boyfriend walks into the room, so he passed right by me. I didn't look straight at him but greeted him while turning down the covers. No answer. Still sidetracked with plugging in my phone and such, I ask him if he's coming to bed, as he was over on his side of the bed standing. He doesn't answer. I still wasn't looking at him. He likes to joke around with me, so I straight up ask, "Are you mad or messing with me right now?" As I finally look up, he ducks down by his side of the bed, and seriously, I just thought of picking up something our son had thrown down there and chucking it at him. I asked the same question again, and it was at that moment my actual boyfriend walks into the room and goes, "Who are you talking to?" At that moment, I had chills over every inch of my body, and he just shook his head like, "You're nuts, girl." Since then, there have been a few smaller things that happened. My son's toy went off in the living room once with no one around it. And one morning, my boyfriend came home from night shift and our laundry basket was in the middle of the kitchen. He thought I'd moved it there before bed, but I assured him I had no reason to. The reason I'm sharing this now is that I was just cooking in the kitchen and heard whistling behind me, and earlier today, I heard a human adult cough upstairs. Safe to say, I am freaked out. My neighbor is friends with the previous owner's first wife, and she used to live in our home. While she was visiting, I asked if she'd ever experienced anything in the home. She laughed and said, "Oh yeah, that's just Jimmy's brother." Jimmy being her ex-husband. I finally feel validated. When I was younger, my uncle owned a really big house. One day I was home with his dogs, my grandmother and her friend, and they were sunbathing by the pool, and asked me to get something from inside the house. I went in and got the item, and since it was hot outside, I decided to take a little walk around. Then, when I was about to turn a corner of a hallway, I saw a shadow of a foot. The lighting made no sense because it was just a silhouetted foot, like it was about to step into the hallway. I was so shocked and thought I was tripping out until my uncle's dog barked, then went to chase after it. He came back from the other way of the hallway, looking confused, like he couldn't find out whatever it was we just saw. I was so scared I went to ask my grandma if anyone else was here or if she'd invited someone, but she said she hadn't. I didn't explain what happened because I didn't think they'd believe me, but the fact the dog saw it too was all I needed to know that I wasn't going crazy and I genuinely saw something. My boyfriend and I recently moved into an apartment. We instantly fell in love with the place and got the price. It was approved and we moved in quickly. The place is in a college town area. There's a bar nearby, grocery stores and fast food places, nothing out of the ordinary nor sketchy. On the day of move-in, our landlord gave us keys, and briefed us on the neighbours. There are only 4 apartments in the complex. The landlord said that they were reserved for the most part. One neighbour was so scared of COVID that they stayed inside. The neighbour across from us seemed to be very reserved too. Now, I saved the best for last. Our bottom floor neighbour called Cal. As we were walking up towards our place, our landlord says, "Oh, yeah, that's Cal. He's a bit weird." My boyfriend and I looked at each other like, what the hell does he mean by that? His windows and doors were wide open. The landlord explained that he did not have AC at the moment. He continues to have all the windows and doors open, and we ignored it and continued unpacking. We had prior plans to leave town, so we did not spend the first few nights there, and upon arrival we discovered why he was labelled as weird. When we first saw him, we said hello and made some comment about the weather. He seemed confused and disoriented and said, "Ooh-ha, yeah, okay." As the days passed, we would say hi, and he would reciprocate at times. It was obvious that he was socially awkward. If I pulled up into our parking lot and he saw me, he would scurry into his room. Thought it was a bit unusual, but I brushed it off. We thought that was the extent of his weird, but boy were we wrong. Slamming, shoving, and the hitting of his own door started at night. Only at night. The slamming and banging was so loud that it woke us up. When we got closer to our door, we heard him yelling. We finally understood why he was weird. This continued for many nights in a row. We would notice that he just stands in the middle of the parking lot and talks to himself. If he sees me, he goes back inside. Things escalated this past weekend. It was late in the evening. We were chilling, watching TV when we heard a knock. We immediately knew who it was, since Cal was chilling outside with the neighbours. My boyfriend answered the door, and Cal asked if we had seen a young Asian woman walking around. My boyfriend said no, and he walked away. Last night I came home from visiting my family, and immediately after I come home, Cal went upstairs. My boyfriend answered the door and asked if we had seen his mum walking around. My boyfriend said no and closed the door. To conclude, this morning at 6 a.m, we heard an extremely loud knock. I awoke immediately and went to the door and didn't see anyone, but I thought I saw a flashlight. I got super scared and woke up the boyfriend. We looked out, and there was a police officer looking for Cal. For what we made out, Cal called the police due to hearing a gunshot, and a young woman screamed. My boyfriend had been awake since 5 a.m, and stated he didn't hear any of that. At this point, we were quite on edge with this dude. If he comes upstairs again, we're gonna have to ask the other neighbours. I think this man is mentally ill. It does not negate the fact that he purposefully tries to talk to us in the late hours of the night. Compassion is shown, but boundaries will be set. I wish him the best, but our safety, including his, is prudent. The police were called because we heard him yell and scream for help. They came out and said they already knew about him. It seems like he's harmless, but we're still keeping our distance. When I was maybe 4, we had to spend Christmas Eve at my uncle's house in Wales. We had a big pheasant dinner with all the trimmings. I specifically remember having Brussels sprouts that were very bitter. That night at around 3 a.m, we were awoken by a bright flash that filled the whole house, and a plate-rattling shudder. I mean, every room in the house lit up with a brilliant blue light that left us all awake and near blinded for a few good seconds. Like a camera flash went off inches from each of our faces at the same time. Meanwhile, Bracken, my uncle's Irish setter, started going insane in the living room, tearing around the place, knocking over tables and barking at just about anything. My uncle got the dog cooled down, and everyone finally got resettled, but I remember asking my mum what just happened, and she simply didn't have a good answer for me. Ball lightning? Some sort of piezoelectric discharge from minerals beneath the house? Who knows? Who am I kidding? It was Santa. I'm sure of it. I'd like to share the story of my grandparents' house, which is undoubtedly haunted. Erected in 1960, this residence stands atop a cemetery for African Americans from the era of slavery, long abandoned and nestled amidst dense woods. All the houses in this southern countryside are ensconced in the same eerie ambience. While my encounters with spirits date back to my early days, some recent paranormal experiences have heightened my awareness. Mysterious knockings echoing through unreachable corners of the house due to obstructing furniture. My great-grandmother, a 76-year-old diabetic with limited mobility, resides with my grandparents. Her handicapped condition prevents her from generating the knocks emanating from her room. The attic, a place of occasional disappearance of items, leaves my feline companions staring into the void. Though I've heard that animals can perceive ghosts, my paranoia remains within reasonable bounds. A recent incident involving a light falling from the ceiling a mere few months ago. The new and properly installed light inexplicably detached its covering. The puzzling occurrence in an infrequently visited attic lingers in my mind. My more recent ghost encounter dates back to the 4th of July during a family gathering. My cousins, more inclined to impress her boyfriend, engage in a prank near the woods. What began as a jest led us to a white, emaciated figure with disheveled hair. My impaired vision hindered a clear view of its face, but the creature ran towards us after our revelation. Fleeing in fright, I slipped in the wet grass, hastily re-entered the house, and recounted the ordeal to my cousin. The fright escalated when knocks on the door followed. An update, nearly a year later, reflects sporadic scares. With a different cousin sleeping over the kitchen, it became the epicenter of strange occurrences. The kitchen light turned on repeatedly despite assurances from my cousin. A subsequent unsettling incident involved the back entrance slightly opening and the light mysteriously turning on. Paranoia set in, but my mother and I have since moved into a new house. Despite being mostly alone due to their work commitments, nighttime continually invokes fear and unease. The specters of my past experiences cast long shadows over my present solitude. Let me take you back almost a decade, when I was around 6 or 7. At the time, I lived, and still do, with my grandparents, in a 2-bedroom single trailer with an additional room added on. One night, as I slept with my little sister and my mum in the same bed, I suddenly awoke, heart racing, believing I had just emerged from a nightmare. Upon sitting up, I observed a peculiar short shadow figure in the room. The hallway illuminated its path as it transformed and moved, with its head resembling a sideways lemon, swaying side to side as it glided towards me. Terrified, I sought refuge under the covers and urgently called for my mum. The next encounter happened at my cousin's house. While in the attic, all my younger cousins could see the same shadow figure that the adults could not. It was aggressively slamming doors and accelerating upon noticing me. After that incident, it vanished, right until December of 2020. In the midst of an incident that triggered my depression, being alone at home at the age of 15, a dark feeling compelled me to leave the house immediately. Looking down the hallway, the darkness intensified, prompting me to run outside, pray, and find solace. Since then, I felt a constant sense of being watched at my grandparents' house. Fast forward to the fall of 2021. In the additional part of my grandparents' trailer, I glimpsed an orange/red figure outside. No knees, calves, or head, resembling a corpse. Opening the door, expecting my grandfather, I found no one. In 2022, my grandparents got a new trailer in the same location. Alone every day gave me a feeling of dread, especially in my grandmother's room, leaving me to avoid it. My mum, little sister and I began seeing a lady in a long white dress, or shadow entity, in our peripheral vision. Recently, the trailer, now flipped, brought a chilling encounter. I spotted the orange figure again, the entire body visible, seemingly gliding. Terrified, I shook uncontrollably and nearly cried. After calming down, I returned to the kitchen only to witness another figure, entirely black with white eyes, standing in the same gliding posture. The house is near an abandoned home, and a nearby neighbor passed away. I'm uncertain if these events are at all related, but I'm hesitant to return home. When I shared my experiences with my grandmother, she advised me to pray, but I thought I'd ask all of you, what should I do? I was in my early 30s, a father of 3 small children. My wife, now ex, and I have a 5-year-old daughter, 3-year-old son, and 10-month-year-old son. My father's mother passed away, but due to her lengthy illness was in a care home for 3 to 4 years before this story took place. A few weeks after she passed, I had been working as a bartender, often arriving home at 2 to 3 a.m. One such early morning I laid awake in bed, but to be honest I was likely in and out of sleep mode. I looked out my bedroom door and saw my grandmother smiling at me. She was somewhat radiant but also not fully clear to me. Not sure of the word, maybe translucent. She was not walking but flowing effortlessly. It was like I was paralyzed. I couldn't speak. I couldn't wake up my wife beside me. After looking at me for what seemed like much longer than it was, the bedroom across from ours had 2 older kids in the bunk. She visited each kid, seemingly touching them and kissing their foreheads. She turned to leave that room, facing me once again, and I felt an overwhelming peace. It was as if she had conveyed to me that she was happy with me, and she continued on to leave my sight. She turned to enter my youngest child's room. We had a child or baby monitor in this room, and he woke up and was making baby noises. This woke up my wife. She asked what was going on, and I was sitting up, and I guessed from the look on her face it quickly helped her accept what I began to tell her. A few weeks later, my daughter began telling us about her dreams at breakfast or lunch. She would speak of Grandma and how she would visit us. My 4-year-old daughter gave me some more mature details of family struggles that my mother never knew about, and that my father had all but forgotten, as it's from his youth. So do I believe? I'm not sure what's out there, but something definitely happened, and it wasn't just in my head. My husband, son and I just moved to a new apartment almost a month ago. Everything has been fine here so far, except the fact that I have bad dreams nearly every night about my husband, like that he hates me. But anyway, I've had unexplainable scratches on my arms showing up. I figured that I was scratching myself in my sleep. Well, that was until tonight. My husband was sitting at his gaming desk playing his games. I was standing beside his desk, just talking, when I felt a burning sensation on the back of my right upper thigh. I look and there was a scratch. I wasn't wearing any pants, just a t-shirt and underwear, so I figured I somehow scratched myself on something. It was a super long scratch going across my upper thigh and under my butt. I showed my husband and we both said it was weird and not a big deal. Then I feel the sensation again. I look and there's another scratch, above the first, on my lower right butt cheek. It wasn't there 30 seconds earlier. I never left the spot. So I go get a better look in the mirror, and show my husband again. He also says it was not there when I showed him the first scratch, and I'm confused at this point. Still haven't sat down, didn't go anywhere, but to the bathroom to check out the scratch. I'm back to standing beside his desk. That's when I feel the burning again. I run back to the mirror, and on top of my right butt cheek, there are multiple scratches, like 4, maybe 5 marks together in a row. That freaked me out, because it looked like an animal or person did it. I wasn't scratching myself on the corner of something or walking around the house, plus the fact that my body didn't touch anything since I discovered the first scratch, and I'm not the kind of person to blame anything on the paranormal, but I'm having a hard time explaining what the hell just happened, and I could use a hand with coming up for a reasonable explanation for the phantom scratches. Shortly after moving into my first apartment, I started having strange encounters with one of my neighbors on laundry night. I would pass through my neighbor's carport when it rained to go to the laundromat. He stood in the shadows a bit and startled me several times, possibly avoiding the rain. I tried to be friendly, but he would just stare at me, smoking his cigarettes and not say a word. Soon it became a regular routine for him, and then the apartment across the way opened up and he moved into that one. I changed laundry to a daytime-only event. One night I sat on my stoop on my phone and noticed a red light in the distance. It was him, sitting in the dark with a video camera pointed straight at me. I went inside to tell my friend, who had just been crashing at my place for a few weeks and freaked out and relieved about the timing. That night my friend staying with me went out, and when he was gone, I heard loud bangs that sounded far away. But I used a sound machine to help me sleep, so I wasn't sure what it was. The next day leaving, we noticed the door wood around the deadbolt was all mushed up. I asked him if he noticed it when he came back, but it was late and a little drunk, so he wasn't sure. The maintenance people were very concerned because it looked like someone had tried to break in while I was home alone. Shortly after that, I left and got a new apartment. Fortunately, my new roommate had a big dog, and when she was out of town one night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to him growling at her window. I went over and ensured it was locked. The next day, my neighbor asked me if I locked myself out, and I said no, why? Sure enough, the screen on the outside was all twisted, as if someone had tried to break in but got interrupted by the big dog. The worst part was that I had out-of-state plates, and all of my friends kept telling me to get them switched, because I was sticking out to the police. I often thought that he tracked me down by my plates and tried again, or maybe I was just paranoid, and it was a series of break-ins looking for money and jewelry. This all started a number of years ago, I want to say around 2019, when my son was born. We'd just moved to this new apartment in the city that we live in. I don't want to disclose where. Strange stuff would always happen, but we'd assume it was just our forgetfulness, or try and play it off, like losing our keys, and then somehow finding them in the middle of the floor. One particular occurrence was when my husband lost his wallet. He was just about to leave for work and had sworn he'd left it in his pocket of his suit, but when he went to check his suit, it was no longer there. He spent about an hour and blamed pretty much everyone in the house that they had taken or moved it to try and be funny. But after the search continued, and everyone had checked everywhere, including his suit, we found it in his suit pocket, where he claimed it hadn't been. Everyone, and I mean everyone in the house, had looked inside it, so none of us could ascertain exactly how it made it back, as the suit was constantly within visual distance from everybody. That still stumps us. But the answer might lie before us. You see, after my youngest son was born, I got into the nasty habit of getting addicted to video games. One game in particular that took a great toll on my time was The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It's a fantastic game, by the way, but I digress. My son would wake up at all hours of the night, and my husband, having a demanding job in the city, would need me to be here with him to put him back to sleep. It would be my nightly routine that every time he woke up, I put him in the baby carrier, grab my Switch controllers, and gently rock him back to sleep. This could take anywhere between half an hour to an hour after a feed, and I was fine to be stimulated enough by playing a game to not fall asleep while trying to put him to sleep. It was around one of these times, in the pitch darkness of the living room, that I heard a noise coming from down the hall. To give you an explanation, our living room was at the end of the apartment, and the bedrooms were towards the door. There was only one corridor that led between every room and the living room at the end. I was in the living room playing the Switch, sound muted, and the silent sound of our apartment with the distant noises of the city underneath were everything I could hear. But this creak of the floorboard was extremely tangible. I could hear the movement. Creak, creak, creak. It sounded like my husband was coming to say something, which was unusual as he really liked his sleep, especially as he was very tired because he had a lot of work. I waited assuming he was going to come, as I was in a particularly riveting part of my game. I casually glanced over to the open doorway, and he wasn't there, so I just carried on playing. A few minutes went by, and I wondered why he hadn't come yet. So, at an appropriate time, I switched off the Switch and went over to the bedroom, placed my son into his crib, and looked over to my husband that was fast asleep. I asked myself why he had walked this way and not come over. Maybe he peeked his head in when I wasn't paying attention and left it at that. When he came back from work later that evening and we were having a nice long conversation about his day and my day, I casually slipped in that I hadn't seen him in the night. He asked me what I meant, and I said, well, I heard you walk this way, but when I looked over, you weren't there. Did you try and scare me and then gave up or something? He looked at me perplexed, claiming he had never done such a thing, and he wouldn't be wasting his time trying to scare me when he was absolutely exhausted from work. Unsure if he was just playing with me or not, I let it slip. A few days later, though, the same thing happened. I was playing Switch, quite groggy this time, sleepier than the time before to say the least, and I would hear footsteps, this time slightly faster. But instead of ending near the door, they actually came into the room. That took me out of my stupor, and I was more awake than ever. The noise stopped just past the open doorway, and I was very, very scared. I ran back to the room, consequently waking up my son, and the screaming started all over again. But I chose not to play any games, and rocked him back to sleep standing in the corridor, waiting for him to fall asleep so that I could get back to bed and cuddle my husband terrified. The final thing that happened was actually during the day. I was making lunch for my son and I when I heard someone walking on the hallway. I looked over the hallway, which I had to kind of pull my head back in order to do, and didn't see anyone. As it was daylight, I was more brave than I was at night, and feeling a little bit pissed off, wondered who it could be. For a fleeting instant, I wondered if my son had learned to walk, which would be unlikely as he was very young and hadn't even started crawling yet. I walk out into the hallway and see nothing, but the sound was still approaching me. It was in that moment, I'm unsure if out of desperation or fear, that I screamed that whoever it wasn't funny, and that I don't want it here near me, my husband or son anymore. The sound stopped pretty much instantly, and we didn't have any repeat noises for the time we stayed in that apartment. I grew up with 4 older brothers. For context, I'm a girl. They got me into League of Legends, and since I was young, I have been hooked. So, as far as social life goes, It was pretty much spent online. By the time I was 19, I was pretty good at the game, and my brothers, for the most part, had all but left and no longer played. It was just me. I was very much into my cyber world. I had built up an army of friends online, and I'm gonna be honest, being a girl playing an online game is a bit of a confidence booster. Some of these friends I'd grown really close with, even added them on Skype, Discord, WhatsApp, and we would chat all the time. And we couldn't wait until we could log back into our virtual world to carry on doing whatever it was we needed to do. I had a job working in a bar, which meant that my hours didn't always coincide with other people for gameplay, but we still had a good time when it did. I was recently single, as my online boyfriend had dumped me for another girl, but I wasn't salty, as we'd never even met in real life. This is important later. Cue in Gareth, or Stormbreaker 43. He and I were regular friends. We'd known each other for a while and we were part of the same group, but we didn't talk all that much, although we did have each other on social media, as back in the day I tended to be very liberal with who I added. He and I started talking a bit more. He'd always compliment me on my looks, telling me how gorgeous I was, and that he really wanted to meet me. He never told me where he lived, but he had heard through the grapevine and what other people knew about me, that I lived in a relatively medium-sized city in the Midwest. He already knew which one. I just want to be a little bit more anonymous for the sake of the story. To cut a long story short, he started grilling all my friends to get personal information about me, but he was sneaky about it. He'd throw in these questions very carefully, as some of my friends wouldn't even notice that he were asking, and the fact that he varied his sources when it came to sourcing questions meant that no one noticed early on. When he'd gathered enough information about me, did he manage to locate the bar I was working at. I was just doing my thing. It was about 10 p.m. and it was getting a little bit quiet, as the bar is a bit out of the city limits. I remember that I was just cleaning a glass when I turn around and I kind of do a double take. He looked familiar, but I couldn't think of where. He comes up, basically running to the bar screaming my name, and after a few seconds did it hit me. Instead of being overcome with joy as he expected me to be, I was instantly paralyzed to the spot. How the hell did he locate me, I thought. I was very careful about giving out information and never told anyone specifically where I worked. When I asked him how he found me, after recovering from the initial shock, he said that he was just, and I quote, passing through the area and needed a drink. I asked him, "You do know it's illegal to drink and drive, right?" And he said, yeah, no, just like a Coke or something. I gave him a half smile, unsure if he were lying or not, but my gut told me I couldn't trust him. I served him the drink, we chatted for a bit, but there were other patrons that required my attention, so I dismissed myself, and within about 40 minutes of me not being able to say much to him, he was on his way. I didn't play that night. I was feeling very uncomfortable. Or the next night. My friends started getting concerned, and I reached out to a few of my closest and told them what had happened. They were horrified, and told me they didn't even know he'd done that. But come to think of it, he had asked questions about me, and that's when we started piecing it together. Very quickly, he was kicked out of the friendship group because we were all very weirded out by his creepy behavior. I wish it ended there though. He'd pop up at my bar from time to time, come in, and try and talk to me as often as possible. He didn't even care that he was out the group. He was fixated on getting my attention. It got more and more. He began coming in twice a week, then 3 times, then every day. His stays would last several hours in his attempts to woo me. He would bring me flowers and chocolates, and then that moved on to other creepy things. He started saying that we were in a relationship and that he couldn't wait to move in with me. This was insane. One day, I just went up to my manager and told him I quit, and didn't come back in after that. You see, our bar is very small, and only 2 of us work there in one go. So, it's safe to say that they couldn't just put me at the back or swap my shifts around, because they'd overlap anyway. I was happy to be gone and rid of him, and after a few weeks did I find a new job elsewhere, but it didn't take him long after that to find out where it was. I didn't know how he was getting this information, and I was starting to get really paranoid. I ended up quitting League of Legends because I couldn't hack it. I was sure that someone was telling him what I was doing and where I was going, and I couldn't trust anyone. I ended up moving back to my parents' house and lied low for a little bit, and from there he didn't seem to find me. I hope to not see him again. It's been about 3 months, and I just don't understand why he would fixate on me. I really just want to be left alone. I remember my high school years. I was very exposed and into dating a lot of guys. I'm now 20, and even though it's been a little over 5 years, call me whatever you want, I don't care, I'm in a happy relationship. In my last year of high school, there was this app going around about asking you questions to another person in their inbox anonymously. And throughout those days of the app, I would keep getting anonymous messages saying, "Oh, you're beautiful. I wish I were with you. I wish you were mine." This was summer break of 2017. Like I said, I was exposed to a lot of guys while the app was a hit. I was dating a guy named Ernie. He was very oblivious about the app, and I started flirting with the guy that had been messaging me anonymously, Chad. Chad suddenly slid into my DMs. I started talking from there, and he confessed that it was him who had messaged me all those things. He was cool. He showed me his SoundCloud music, in which I told him they were lame to begin with. I'm a straightforward person, and I guess he liked that. A month went by and we were talking, and I thought it was just as friends, until he told me that he had feelings for me. Now in my town, everyone knows everyone, whether it's through friends or social media or school. So I kind of knew who he was in a way, but had just never really met him in person. But anywho, I told him that I was single, even though I was still with someone, and started talking to him. 2 weeks go by, and I told Ernie that it was over, because I thought I had feelings for Chad, and I had told Chad that I was into him. A couple of weeks go by from then, and I was dating Chad. But while still speaking to Ernie, one thing led to another, and we ended up hooking up. This made me feel guilty. But being the straightforward person I was, I just let Chad know what had happened, and I did feel bad. He told me what a lot of guys would say. "I still love you, it doesn't matter anymore." I still couldn't live with myself, the idea that I had kind of cheated on him, and told him there was no way I was going back to him when I hooked up with Ernie. as in doing so it made me realize I still had feelings for Ernie, and not Chad. This is where he starts to harass me. He was very persistent that he forgave me, and that nothing would change the way he saw me, and I kept saying that I didn't want to be with him. Bear in mind that the time frame of our communication from when I started flirting to when I ended it was about 2 to 3 months. I had to block him on everything I had, Snapchat, Instagram, my personal mobile number, as I thought I'd made it clear I didn't want to have anything to do with him. He would then start making accounts and request me. In the pictures he uploaded, he would write paragraphs about how much he missed me, and that would just creep me the hell out and cause me to block him immediately. He created 12 other accounts and messaged me. They are all from him, telling me how much he missed me, how he was crying and hadn't slept in days. I ignored everything until he started contacting my brother and sister. They showed my dad, who in turn got super pissed at me for causing such a mess. I told him that he'll get over it, and that all Chad needed was time. But I was wrong. For the next 1.5 years he would create accounts, download apps, and have a temporary number and call me through it. I knew it was him, and never answered. That is until he threatened me. He told me that if I didn't talk to him, he would expose my nudes. Now I worked as a receptionist and had just started having panic attacks, and I began crying and couldn't stop shaking, and I needed to be sent home for the day after that. He did stop for about a month or so, and then went back to it, but this time he would call me with a blocked number. I answered not knowing who it was, because a month or more went by from not knowing about him, and it was Chad. I started going off at him until he began crying. I told him I was going to get a restraining order, and then he said he just wanted to be friends. I thought it would be cool, because I was already going out with someone which is my current boyfriend. So I accepted that we could be friends, until he started calling me names and started questioning me on why I left him. I also needed a better excuse to leave him, and I told him, "You're crazy and need help," and blocked him immediately. I live in the city of Montbello and work in Tustin, and have the morning shift from 5 AM to 2 PM. Every day when I go out to my car to get to work, I see a person from the corner of my street with a black hoodie, always staring in my direction. At first, it was like, whatever, because I live in a ghetto neighborhood and see sketchy things all the time. Then, one day, I told my neighbor to come out with me to my car, as he's a tall, buff guy. When I see the hooded guy in the corner, I yell out to him, "Chad, I'm getting that restraining order on you," and he ran off, never to be seen again. A week passed with no sign of him, until one day I get a call from the blocked number, and obviously I decline it. Ever since I declined the blocked number, I get at least 30 to 50 calls from him every day. I am unable to get the restraining order since I have a very busy schedule. He leaves voicemails, some of him singing, some of him cursing me out, and some of him crying and saying how I was his first girlfriend. On March 13th, 2019, he called me 30 to 50 times a day. I know some will say switch your phone number, but I can't either way. I have 2 times, and he still manages to find me. I don't wish this upon anyone. I just want to be at ease. I met a guy online. We spoke for a day or 2, but I was at the tail end of my degree, and things were getting to be a lot. So I decided that there would be no dating until I was done. I let the handful of guys that seemed nice know before deleting the dating app, so they would know why I deleted it, and wouldn't think I ghost them. He happened to be online when I sent it, and said I seemed cool, and asked if we could keep in touch. Sure, no worries. I added him on Facebook. Maybe once a week he'll ask how I was. Normal conversation stuff. I'd chat about uni, work, the gym, whatever. And after about perhaps 2 to 3 months, he's like, hey, we've been chatting for a bit. Why don't we grab a coffee? I'm like, yeah, sure. He seemed nice enough. I reiterated it would be as friends, and that was fine with him. I was about to head into exams, so we made plans for the 3 weeks' time after I had finished. He started messaging me more and more regularly after making plans, more than once a day, and starts calling it a date, which people call catching up coffee date without it meaning an actual date. But I wanted to make sure that we were still on the same page, so I just said, hey, you keep calling it a date. Just to make it clear, we're just catching up as friends. He snapped. He was sending me all sorts of horrible things on Facebook, so I blocked him. I gave him my number when we made plans though, so he started calling and leaving voicemails. It was late, so I put my phone on silent and went to sleep. Next morning, I wake up to 37 missed calls and voicemails between 10 PM, continuing until 4 AM, as well as a multitude of horrible texts. Now this was 7 years ago, when you couldn't just block someone on a phone. At first I thought that if I ignored him he would get bored, but after about a week, he wasn't slowing down, with dozens of calls a day. I called my phone company to have him blocked, and they said that you can only block 3 people. Are you sure? I had to jump through all the hoops, and then they turned around and said they couldn't do it, and that I would have to call the police. So I did, and they told me I'd have to call the phone company, but I could make a statement of harassment in case he did something more. 3 weeks later, he's still going strong. But in his texts, he starts saying he's going to force me to go on a date with him. I won't have a choice. Then he begins saying that if I won't come to him, he will come to me, and is telling me my schedule, with where I will be at any given time, which he puts together based on our weekly conversation about normal stuff, threatening to come to me wherever I will be. This meant I had to stop doing my regular activities, and pretty much became a hermit. He ended up making a threat to my life. I can't remember what he said word for word, but it was essentially, girls like you get what they deserve, or something like that. But clearly, more threateningly, as he said that he would be the one to make it happen. I contacted the police again, and that was enough for an RVO, and I never heard from him again. Oh, and I was 20, but his pictures looked younger, so I didn't realize online, but it turned out this guy was 34, so it wasn't just a dumbass young kid, it was a grown-ass man. I've had many other psychos since this guy, but I'm very grateful phones have since allowed you to block anyone at any time.